I'd like to call to order the City Council study session of March 31st, 2026. Clerk, please call the roll.
Deputy Mayor Bushnell.
Present.
Councilmember Diaz. Here. Councilmember Hines.
Here.
Councilmember Palmer. Here. Councilmember Rumba.
Here.
Councilmember Sidalge.
Here.
Councilmember Scott.
Here.
Councilmember Walker.
Here.
Mayor Ibsen.
Here. Our first agenda item is state legislative planning and permitting mandates. I'd like to call on Planning and Development Services Assistant Director Brian Boudet to begin the presentation. And Steve Eckerson. Welcome, folks.
Thank you very much, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. Pleasure to be here this afternoon. And as you said, talk a little bit about state mandates, and this is with a particular focus on planning and permitting mandates over the last couple of sessions. So I'm Brian Boudet, the Assistant Director in Planning and Development Services, and happy to be here with Steve Atkinson, the manager of our long-range planning group. So this is at some level follow-up to conversation that started back in January when Planning and Development Services was providing its overview of our department. One of the things that we talked about was the reality of a lot more state bills being passed that were affecting, in general, the Planning and Development Services Department's work program, and particularly Planning Commission's work program as well. So I know one of the questions that came up as part of that conversation was council's interest in getting a better understanding of what some of those mandates are and how that plays out both in the work program and upcoming policy decisions that council will ultimately be making. So we're going to talk a little bit about last year's session, 2025, some of the primary land use bills that came out of that, as well as a little bit about this year's legislative session, which, as you know, just finished up, and there's a lot of bills that got adopted this year and are still kind of in the waiting for governor's signature phase. So we'll talk about those, but obviously some of them are still in waiting to see exactly whether they get finalized, and if so, what exactly that final form is. And then we'll talk a little bit about how that relates to the existing and future planning work program. So I'm not going to go through everything on these lists. You have them. We're going to highlight a few bills after I sort of give the overview. I'll be honest with you, part of the message here, whether intentional or not intentional, is that there is a lot. And again, these are just the bills that specifically are relating to planning and development issues. So you'll see a number of things on there. The other big item, and I think no surprise to the council, as Tacoma is struggling with it, but Tacoma not unique in struggling with housing production, housing affordability, is that certainly is much of the state's focus over the last couple of years, going back even further than that, obviously with the middle housing bill that drove part of our Home in Tacoma conversation, but the state is continuing to try to find ways to unlock additional housing production. So there's a bunch of bills on there. Like I say, many of these are modifying processes associated with residential development, trying to streamline those, addressing regulatory barriers that have been identified by the state, by the development community, and others. And just generally trying to increase both production and tax support for new housing development. A couple that I'll just highlight on here, in part, well, one of them I'll highlight is the HB House Bill 1576, which is about historic designations. This is one that was adopted, and in fact, actually, the council has already taken action on this one. You may recall back in October of this last year, the council updated some of the historic district regulations, and that addressed the requirements of that bill. In addition, there's stuff on here about housing elements, minimum parking requirements we'll talk about in a little bit, and there's also components on here about transit-oriented housing development, which is also a really significant bill that the state adopted recently. One other one on here, I think, is let's see. Oh, it's on a future slide, so I'll talk about it as I get to it. So one of the big ones on there is parking requirements. This is another place where the state has taken a lot of action over the last few years to try to reduce the level of parking requirements. As council is well aware, parking takes up a lot of space. Parking costs a significant amount of money. And this is a place where the state has really taken liberties to utilize parking as sort of an incentive and a carrot as ways to try to encourage housing development of different types, of different kinds. So sort of in the same way that the state often uses tax policy to try to encourage some things and discourage others, parking seems to be another place where the state has done a lot of similar work. So I think as the council is well aware, we have a project that's already kicked off through the Planning Commission and through the Infrastructure Planning and Sustainability Committee to look at parking requirements. And so there is a pretty significant reduction that's being considered, as well as the potential for just generally removing parking requirements. You will see on here where you start adding up all of the different exemptions, small units, 1,200 square feet and under, small commercial spaces, affordable housing, childcare, other things like that. You start getting to a place where between what the city has done in the past in reducing and exempting parking requirements and what the state is mandating that the city do to further reduce and exempt parking requirements, you start getting to a place where there's almost more places where there's no parking requirements than places where there would be parking requirements. So, like I say, that project already in the works, but is responding to this and other state bills. Another place where the state has put a decent amount of emphasis is on methods to encourage homeownership, I'll sort of broadly say. And much of that comes down to the ability to divide property. One mechanism is condominiums. That's one way to divide property and allow for individual ownership. And splitting property or platting property is another mechanism that's generally used to divide up properties so they can be individually sold and owned. So a number of bills that the state has done this last year, and I think there's more this year as well, looking at ways to streamline and reduce the processing requirements associated with dividing property. So one of those is what they're calling lot splits. And so this is basically taking one property and dividing into two. So it's kind of the simplest, smallest version of subdividing property. But the state's really mandating that we create a very streamlined administrative process to try to make those as simple as possible. And one of the last ones that I'll highlight here, which in part because I think it's one of the biggest ones from last year's legislative session, was regarding transit-oriented development. So this bill essentially mandates that the city, and it's not just Tacoma, but basically this is associated with where there's high-capacity transit investments happening throughout the Puget Sound region. So it's tied directly to rail stations or bus rapid transit BRT stations. So in Tacoma, obviously we have rail stations, and this is light rail and commuter rail, both count. But the requirement is that within a half mile of rail stops, that the city is required to allow for a floor area ratio of 3.5. Now, floor area ratio, kind of a wonky term. What exactly does that mean? It's a correlation between the size of the property and how much building that you can put on it, how much square footage of building. The idea is you would take, if you had a 10,000 square foot property, 3.5 would give you 35,000 square feet of building area, essentially. So it's just a multiplier of the land area. Just to give a sense for that, because it doesn't translate very simplistically to stories, because basically nobody builds property line to property line a straight vertical box. It actually becomes somewhat exponential. And so an example up there, this is a project in Tacoma that has an FAR of 3.9. You can see in that case it's about a 6-story building. That's pretty common when you talk about FARs of that scale. So again, the basic requirement here is that the city will be required to upzone areas within a half mile of rail stations to allow for, at a minimum, that FAR of 3.5. And then there's some bonuses and things on top of that. So for geographic, help you understand where we're talking about, and this is another project, that one's up In the stadium area, that one has an FAR of just over 4, again, sort of in that 6-story plus range. But what does a half mile from rail stations look like in Tacoma? Well, most of that is downtown, obviously, along the Link light rail system, the T-line, and the one in South Tacoma, the commuter rail station in South Tacoma. So you can see the orange area there that's within the bubbles. That is our downtown regional growth center. So that includes, at the extents, includes the stadium district and the Hilltop mixed-use centers. If you go a half mile out from those, you'll see that that goes essentially to Sprague on the west side, and north for orientation, you're about to where Annie Wright is. So if you think about the scale of buildings, again, the one on the left there is in the stadium mixed-use center, right in the core. That the requirement is essentially to upzone areas for that distance up to about that scale. So it's kind of like extending mixed-use center zoning out to that half-mile distance, again, which covers a pretty large area. So we're talking about most of the sort of North Slope Stadium Seminary area and most of the Hilltop area. And then in South Tacoma, a bunch of that is industrial, so that won't really get impacted as much, but there certainly are areas to the east and southeast of the existing South Tacoma 56 and South Tacoma mixed-use center that also would require some pretty significant upzoning. So the timeline on this one is 2029. So when we get to the work program conversation at the end, you will see just because of the scale of what that modification is, obviously we're gonna have to get started earlier than 2029 on it. So you'll see that starting to play out. Clearly, some of the other conversations and future policy discussions that will happen is kind of a, how proactive do you get with these kinds of things, right? I mean, that map reflects the existing reality of rail in Tacoma. Well, we know we're talking about Tacoma Dome Link extension that will add at least, one additional station area that's not captured in here over by Portland Avenue, and there's also conversations about future extensions such as the TCC T-line extension. And so inherently the question of, well, how proactive do you get about the zoning that at some point would get triggered once those rail stations are put in place. So just a couple of other quick mention on bills. I know it's come up a couple of times in council conversations. We do have child care centers, modifications for those coming forward as part of this year's annual amendments. The condominiums, the state continues to try to work again on home ownership via condos as well, and made a number of modifications last year, and there's more modifications in a bill this year to try to address some of the challenges around warranties that has led to the longstanding challenge of liability insurance, particularly for construction of condominiums. So I will say I'm starting to hear on the development side people using condominiums, and so I think that is a pretty positive message that the state may have gotten enough modifications done in there to unlock some of those issues. All right, now 2026. Now I mentioned obviously we're the session is over, but the bills are still, many of these are still in the process of being reviewed by the governor's office. I will say actually since the time that I created this PowerPoint presentation, and now some of those bills that are shown on there as not yet signed have subsequently become signed. So probably about half of those. But while we've certainly been tracking the bills that are going through the legislative session this year, only so much assessment yet on as far as impacts, because obviously we don't in many cases know what the final versions are. But I will highlight a few as we go through this as well. Affordable housing on religious properties. So the state has long had a bonus system, bonus requirement in place for religious properties to get additional density. When we did Home in Tacoma, the council incorporated that really into the overall bonus system. So we don't have a specifically called out religious facility one. It actually applies to anybody. So it could be a nonprofit or it could even be a for-profit developer. If they're interested in providing affordable housing, they can also utilize the bonus system that was put in place. Well, what the state has adopted here is a modification to those standards, basically to reduce the thresholds. So whereas it used to be 100% of the units where it had to be affordable, now it's down to 50. So it's trying to make it all the more encouraging some amount of affordable housing to be included. So as I note here, what that's going to force is that as part of home in Tacoma conversations, we will need to modify the bonus system, at least to allow for that change for religious institutions, if not more broadly for other folks, as the council had chosen in the past. One of the other big ones that the state put forward this year, and I think maybe hasn't been signed, or maybe got signed yesterday, I can't remember. Anyways, is this idea of residential development in commercial zones. I will say this is a bigger deal for many other jurisdictions around the state than it is for us. It's not uncommon, I think, that in jurisdictions where they have commercial zoning, they actually prohibit residential. The city of Tacoma has long allowed for residential development in commercial zones. That got all the more instituted when we created mixed-use centers and the mixed-use zoning, which even highlights that ability to do mixed-use projects in those areas. And actually, in the last 25 years, the vast majority of commercial areas in the city have become mixed-use centers. So when you look at the zoning map, most of our commercial is mixed use. One of the things, though, that this bill does also is a common concern is the amount of first floor commercial requirement. So lots of jurisdictions, and we do have this, where in certain areas on key kind of main streets, we limit residential development on the first floor to try to facilitate that few blocks of commercial Main Street activity. The state has provided some limitations on how much of that you can do. I think, again, this is a place where lots of other jurisdictions would kind of do it just very broadly. And the assumption that you could have commercial development on the first floor of mixed-use buildings spanning huge geographies, I think has come back. And that's where the development community has gone to the state and said, hey, this just commercial, economically doesn't work to have that much commercial activity in many cases. So this is going to necessitate that the city look at our pedestrian street designations, which are those areas where we're focusing and limiting residential development on the first floor. We may have to make some tweaks there. I don't think that one's going to be huge, but there's definitely a need to evaluate and make some adjustments. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Great, thank you, Brian. And good afternoon, Mayor Ibsen, Deputy Mayor Bushnell, members of the City Council. I'm Stephen Atkinson, Planning Manager for City of Tacoma Long Range Planning. We have just a few slides left in the presentation. This portion of the presentation will focus on our current planning work program. At the end of these slides, I want to make sure that when we wrap up this discussion, the Council has a good understanding of the projects that we are currently have in progress, the general scope of that work, and the timeline in which these projects will be coming to the City Council for consideration. Also want to make sure that at the end that we have a good understanding of some of the next steps and the process for reviewing and revising, updating the planning work program to start to extend that out to 2027 to 2028, and some of the considerations that will go into that. One thing I wanted to clarify here, just as we get started, kind of a big picture concept here is we often refer to this as the planning work program. I do want to probably be a little bit more accurate in the statement today and say this is the Planning Commission work program, I think more specifically. And I bring that up for two reasons kind of as we get started with this conversation. And the first is simply want to make sure it's clear that there's a number of other projects that are beyond the scope of this work that our long-range planning staff and team are currently either leading or supporting. Second, one of the questions we often get is, what kinds of projects are required to go through Planning Commission review or a full legislative process for City Council consideration? So all of the projects that we're going to talk about as part of this work program are projects that are required under state law and city municipal code to go through both Planning Commission and City Council. So effectively, any project that would amend the city's comprehensive plan or land use development standards, often what we refer to as our land use and zoning code, Title 1306, Title 13 broadly, are required to go through a full Planning Commission City Council process. Second thing I wanted to mention here as we get started is kind of a second question we often hear, which is where do we locally have some flexibility or discretion in how we adopt or enact new state planning requirements. So as I go through these projects, I'll try to give a brief description, timeline, and some idea of kind of where we have some of that local discretion in our planning work. So with that, I'll go ahead and just kind of dive in with a focus on the 2026 projects. First off, we have the Critical Areas Preservation Ordinance Update. This is Chapter 1311 of our municipal code. Generally, these standards are for the protection and preservation of critical areas, which refer to things like fish and wildlife habitat, streams, wetlands. So generally trying to assure that we achieve no net loss of ecological functions in the city of Tacoma. Second, this also includes standards for the protection and preservation of life and property in situations where there are potential for natural disasters, things like flooding, geologically hazardous areas. You can imagine steep slopes and erosion. So generally, there is both a protection of ecological resources as well as a protection of life and property integrated into the Critical Areas Ordinance. This is a state-required update. We are periodically required to review the best available science, implement standards that enact the best available science. And this does, just for the council's awareness, have a significant citywide impact. Critical Areas Ordinance is a critical part of our environmental protections, but it also does have significant impacts on how people can use and develop and build on their property. So this generally gets a lot of interest from folks that may be impacted around the city. We are expecting the Planning Commission to finalize their recommendations tomorrow evening, and then forward that recommendation to the City Council in May and June for your consideration. The next project, the Pacific Avenue Corridor Sub-Area Plan and Environmental Impact Statement, is a project that we've been working on as a partnership with Pierce Transit. This is partially funded through that partnership with Pierce Transit as well as through state grant funds. This is a unique sub-area plan in the city of Tacoma in that it is focused on the entirety of the Pacific Avenue corridor from I-5 to the southern city limits. And this is really looking at a plan to really activate that corridor in conjunction with transit service that we have on Pacific Avenue. The second key part of this is the environmental impact statement. This is being conducted as a what we call a SEPA planned action, which is a process of environmental review that is intended to kind of front load the review and consideration of environmental impacts so that when future projects come in for permitting, there's a more streamlined and more predictable permit path for projects that would occur on this corridor. The 2026 annual amendment package is something we go through on an annual basis to really take in private applications as well as to advance some of the code priorities of the City Council. In this case, the annual amendment package is comprised of 4 applications. The first is the McKinley annexation, and this is our process of establishing the zoning districts that would be in place pending the incorporation of McKinley into that annexation into City of Tacoma jurisdiction. Second is a update to our special needs housing code, and this is both partially in response to a City Council resolution, and secondly, in response to some recent state legislation that modifies how we are required to permit shelters within the City of Tacoma. Our third is the minor planning code amendments. This is typically what we consider non-policy. These are often amendments that we're making to the code to clarify, correct errors in the code, or address clarifications or organization that we have heard as feedback, often from our current planning team or folks who have gone through the permit process and have feedback on their use of the code. The final is legislative code amendments, which is kind of bundling together 2 recent, again, state requirements. First is to update childcare and daycare centers. Again, the state is requiring now that we allow daycare centers in all of our zoning districts by right, and at a minimum in our industrial zoning districts as a conditional use permit. We do have some flexibility in how we account for heavy industrial zones or zoning districts where they may be hazardous uses in close proximity to the daycare facilities. But this is an example of the state adopting legislation that is very prescriptive in terms of the permitting requirements that we have to follow. And then the next is the binding site plans, which is more enabling legislation. Binding site plan is an alternative to more traditional platting and subdivision. It's similar to something like unit lot subdivision, if you're familiar with that. And this is a change at the state law that allows us to allow multifamily residential to utilize the binding site plan. So previously, that was limited to primarily commercial developments within the city under state law. The next project is the Capital Facilities Program. This is the 6-year CFP that is being extended out from 2027 to 2032. Typically, this is something that the council considers as part of your budget process. So the Planning Commission will be working with staff and the Budget Office to put together their review of the CFP in May and June. There will be a public hearing in support of that process and then forwarding their recommendations to the City Council so that can be incorporated into the budget considerations later this year. The Commission's role in the Capital Facilities Program is typically to review the projects that are proposed to be added into the CFP and to determine whether or not the projects are consistent with the comprehensive plan. So if the council is not familiar with this, the Capital Facilities Program under state law is considered to be a chapter of the comprehensive plan. So any amendments to the CFP are considered amendments to the city's comprehensive plan. So it goes through the full public review, through the Planning Commission, and then to the City Council. And generally, state law requires that our capital planning implement and be consistent with the priorities in the comprehensive plan. And then Brian mentioned the parking code. So I won't go into details about that scope of work, but generally the timeline for the parking code is to have that to the City Council, likely Planning Commission recommendation in September of this year. I did forget to mention for 2026 amendments, we are expecting as well that the Planning Commission will complete their recommendations tomorrow night, and that will be on a similar timeline coming to the City Council in May and June. As we get into 2027, the work program really, I think, in my characterization, is a bit of a bridge year. We'll have one major project that will be coming forward to the City Council in the first quarter of 2027. That is something we are currently working on with Planning Commission and the IPS Committee. That is the Landscaping and Tree Code Update, and that is based on Resolution 41682. So we are expecting a Planning Commission recommendation on that by the end of this year, and then coming to council early next year for consideration. I'm going to skip down here to the bottom, and this is kind of what I mean by 2027 being a bit of a bridge year. So we'll have some work that we're starting in 2026 that we expect to conclude in 2027. And then we're going to have a number of projects that are due under state law to be adopted in the 2028 to 2029 time period, but which will likely need to be started in 2027 to complete. And that includes these 4 projects at the bottom of this page: the Shoreline Master Program, the new climate element for the comprehensive plan. We will have a mid-cycle comprehensive plan review, which is a new state requirement. And then the compliance with the new transit-oriented development bill. So that will include the rezones and the code updates to be consistent with those new state requirements. So these are all projects that we expect likely by June of 2027 will need to be starting or in progress in order to meet the timelines for later adoption. Those are all state mandates. So the 2 or 3 projects in the middle are projects that likely will need to be either started, initiated this year or into next year, or some of these are projects that are on more of the wish list, kind of pending staffing resources. So we are anticipating a home in Tacoma code adjustments package kind of based on some of the community input that we've heard to this point, as well as to address some of the ongoing state housing amendments. We will have another annual amendment package coming forward. The projects that you can see here were some of the things that we discussed with Planning Commission, IPS Committee as potential candidates for that annual amendment package, including an update to our commercial zoning, establishing more effective industrial land use transitions, particularly in South Tacoma, around the South Tacoma Manufacturing and Industrial Center, and then some initial code updates to come into compliance with the new passive housing code requirements. The last project here on this page, you'll see kind of a lot of hyphens here: commercial, downtown, mixed-use center, street classifications, and standards update. Is a potential package of plan and code updates responding to a number of different legislative requirements. So first would be the new legislation on limiting how much ground floor commercial we can require in our commercial zoning districts and mixed-use centers. That is something we will likely need to revisit. Second is potentially updates to our downtown sub-area plans, both to update and extend the SEPA Planned Action Ordinance that was adopted as part of that package back in 2014 and 2015, and then to potentially review and update our downtown sub-area plans as well to make sure that those are up to date with new state and regional planning policies. All right, next slide. All right, and as I mentioned at the beginning, we developed this work program in conjunction with the Planning Commission and IPS Committee. We are scheduled to go back later this year, typically start that process with Planning Commission in midsummer, and then culminating in early fall with the IPS Committee to establish and extend that planning work program. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are a few factors that we take into account as we are developing that work. One of the reasons why we developed that program is to make sure that we can consider council priorities alongside our state mandates, local initiatives, as well as periodic private applications that we may receive, and to get input and direction from the city council on how to prioritize that work and align the projects that we are committing to with the available staffing and resources that we have to perform that work. So we do expect, kind of based on the new state mandates that Brian walked through, that we will likely have a significant revisitation and revision that we'll need to consider later this year with City Council and IPS Committee. With that, happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any council questions? Councilmember Sadalge, followed by Councilmember Walker.
Thank you. I know we have a long agenda, so I'll try to keep it relatively short. I had a quick question on slide, I guess this is 6. I just wanted to confirm on the transit-oriented housing. It has things around a BRT, but I saw that the stream isn't included. That's not considered a BRT, I take it?
That's correct, yeah. The enhanced bus service, which has been now Pierce Transit's focus for those corridors, does not qualify as BRT.
But does that stop us from considering it, or is there like a comp plan update if we wanted to kind of get ahead of the curve? Like, for example, whether it's the stream or the Sound Transit station at Portland Avenue, would we have to go through a Plan Com update to kind of incorporate that so we don't have to do a future update?
No, absolutely, Councilmember Sadalge. I mean, obviously, in many cases, the state's setting the minimum, right? So we've got to do at least this much by this time frame. It certainly is local discretion, council's ultimate choice on exactly what you want the scope to be for many of these projects. I would note, obviously, when it comes to stream and particularly Pacific Avenue, right, we've got the Pacific Avenue sub-area plan, corridor sub-area plan that we're working on, which creates the obvious opportunity. And I mean, the basis of that project, it sort of started with BRT and doing up zones to help facilitate that. It may not be quite as extensive as what the state's talking about if it at some point became BRT, but yeah, there is a project that creates that opportunity right there.
Got it. A couple of other questions based on some of the, I mean, I know it's really, you know, I had the benefit of having a briefing like this with some of the parking updates in IPS a few weeks ago. And if I recall, there's just a lot of parking kind of requirements that the state is basically going to make us implement. And if you boil it down, I believe, if I recall correctly from that, we effectively can only mandate, what, one stall for a single family, and then basically half a stall per unit, except for probably about 30 different exceptions.
Yeah, that sounds like sounds like an accurate characterization. Yes.
Okay. So to me, you know, given the complexities involved, I think something we should really consider as a body is, one, this idea that removing any sort of minimum or lowering a minimum isn't the same as requiring no or very little parking, right? Like those two statements aren't equivalent. Removing a floor doesn't mean that a developer can't build parking on site, correct?
Yeah, it has not been a conversation about preventing parking. It's a question about what is the city's role and how much parking should the city require. The state's obviously putting pressure on that, and I think, yeah, the conversation that has been at IPS has absolutely included the exploration of whether or not the city should just more broadly kind of get out of the business of requiring minimum parking.
And so to extend that to some of the other concepts that are put over here, on a transit-oriented neighborhood, requiring a floor of a 3.5 as your ceiling is effectively what you're doing here. You're not saying that every development there has to have an FAR of 3.5, but if you currently have an FAR lower than that, you have to increase that, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the reason why I put the map up there and pointed out, first of all, we're talking about upzones over a very large area. Certainly from a economic development perspective, I mean, if you think about how big the geography is, I mean, this is decades. You know, it would take a very long time, certainly, to fill up those areas. But at the same time, much of those areas are currently urban residential zoning, relatively low scale. So the difference in some of those areas is pretty significant. You know, it might be one project every 10 blocks, but you know, if you're next to that one,
we're not mandating that every project has to be bigger. What we're saying is, if you could build a bigger project, we'll allow it. Whereas today, we're effectively not in some of these places.
Yeah, as is the reality with most regulations, right? It either determines the maximum that you can do in many cases.
Yeah. And I'm pushing this one more time because it's really important when people are listening to this that they hear the correct kind of thing that we're working on. So with no commercial on bottom floor, that also is one of those where they could build it if they want to, but we're not going to mandate it, especially in a world where we've seen where some of these new commercial spaces are not being utilized because there currently is not an ability to use them.
Yeah, not enough commercial demand.
Exactly.
Essentially. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to keep hitting that point that we aren't mandating the thing that people are seeing. We're allowing flexibility, and the flexibility word is important because, especially when it comes to parking, I think we really do need to consider the flexibility that we can give developers to allow for off-street parking on site, in addition to just removing that potentially or lowering those to the state minimums. Couple of things that come to mind, obviously, for me, you've heard this, which is front-loaded and front-access garages. Potentially credits of some sort for permeable surfaces that allows cars to come in, but the surface isn't impermeable, so it also helps with stormwater. Potentially things around credits for, a carport with a solar panel on it or something, right? Flexibilities that can encourage developers to build these things that can be both responsible environmentally, responsible in allowing a product that people want to buy or rent come in. The last thing, and I feel like this might be Chair Walker, so I feel bad about taking this point. I believe there are going to be 4 openings on the Planning Commission. So any masochists out there that want to take on all of this work, there's going to be a lot of work for the Planning Commission coming up because of these state mandates. And there's 9 people on Planning Commission currently, right? So almost half of the Planning Commission has an opening currently, if I'm not mistaken.
Currently we have one vacancy, but we do have 4 positions that will be up for
That are up for
appointment. Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one known vacancy, we don't know exactly what's going to happen with the other 4. There could be up to 4 vacancy, but at least 4 positions we're taking applications for. There's a lot of work. I really do think we need to find some really talented people to help us out in these advisory commissions. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll just be really brief on this. Two things that I would love to follow up and understand better is the Senate Bill 6026, the commercial zones, and how it connects with the pedestrian streets or street designation. We don't have to talk about it now, but would love to follow up on that. And then also, what's the timeline on that one? Because I don't know which package it's part of.
I think, let me see, that one's not yet fully finalized and signed, so I think it
okay.
might, I think we've got a couple of years.
Okay. And then the other one is the childcare centers and the requirements around that as part of the 2026 annual amendment package. I know we'll see all this and it'll come through, but just hoping to grab some time with you to understand that one a little better. And I know that there's specific things that are required by the state, but are there other things that we could be doing at this point? Just want to make sure we're not missing an opportunity to make it as easy as possible to get more good childcare in this city. So thank you. This is all very exciting. I've gotten to spend a lot of time with you at IPS, so I won't spend time now, but looking forward to all of this.
Thank you, Councilmember Hines.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Like Councilor Solde said, I had a little bit of a preview for some of this stuff during IPS. I would say, one, I said this during IPS, I'll say this again now. I think a map showing where you can require parking in the city with all the state law mandates would be more confusing than a map than a map didn't have parking requirements at this point in time, because it would end up with like a Swiss cheese map when you start counting everything in there. And I think actually our members of the public would be more frustrated and angry if they said, well, how many parking spots are required for this project next to my house? Like, well, first of all, let me ask you a couple questions. Do you live next to a daycare? Do you live on this? How far are you away from this? How far away this? Okay, well, this one next to you has no requirement, but if it was built 3 houses down on the right, it would have, it could have parking required. I just think that would get us away from any kind of transparency. So I would encourage you all in the Planning Commission to take that really seriously and think about how do we move forward a parking code that's clear to the public and that the average person can understand and doesn't need like a degree in planning to try to navigate that. Though you all, have those things. So I think that's something to keep in mind. The question I had that brought up in this presentation was House Bill 1491, the TOD bill. It doesn't have to be put in place till 2027. Is that what I heard? Or state gives us a 2027 to put it?
It's actually 2029.
29. Yeah. So my question was, if I'm in one of these green shaded areas, am I vested at the FAR of 3.5 as of the state law being put in place, whether or not we've completed the code on our end? Meaning, like, if I'm in one of these shaded areas, I know state law says I can go to 3.5, but you're telling me it's going to be till 2029, but I have a project that I'd like to get permitted or start the process now. Am I vested at the 3.5 FAR, or do I have to wait until the work gets done?
You don't get it until we change the code.
Could that open us up for some adverse legal action where someone could say, like, hey, the state law says you're allowed to do it? I guess that would be something I'd like to follow up on, right? Because I could see a developer saying, well, I'm in this area. The state law says I should be able to build 3.5. Your code is not up to date yet. You're working on it. But I'd like to get guarantees that I can build this thing.
Yeah, in general, the land use policies are implemented at the local level through local land use codes. So the state law changes. They say, cities and counties, you've got to change your code. You've got this much time to do it. If you don't do it, then you get into the scenario, I think, at some level that you're describing, where somebody could show up and say, hey, wait a minute, you haven't updated your code, and the state says you're supposed to. I want that credit. So
Okay.
we won't get ourselves into that position.
No, I think, all right, that's good to know. My only other comment would be, so it looks like the work plan's laid out for 2026 and all the way into 2027. So council members who are looking to make land use policy decisions or policy work around that need to start talking to you all about getting things added to the Planning Commission's work plan sooner rather than later, and more likely than not it'll end up in 2027 versus 2026, correct?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we will be coming back to IPS committee later this year to talk about the update to the work program for 2027 and 2028. So I think getting a good understanding of what council initiatives you'd like to advance, your priorities are really helpful for us to be able to have that conversation with Planning Commission and City Council. One of the things we are often trying to do is you'll notice that the state mandates don't translate one-to-one with city planning projects. So knowing kind of what kinds of things you may want to advance allows us to start to see how we can bundle things together where maybe it affects a common part of the city or common land use types or common zoning or development codes. So really helpful to start those conversations with staff as soon as possible.
All right, and just as a reminder, anything related to Title 13, which is the land use code and municipal code, has to go through the Planning Commission before it can be enacted, correct?
That is correct.
So just, as for members of the council thinking about land use policy, a reminder that anything that touches Title 13 has to go to the Planning Commission. Like electric fences. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Councilmember Hines asked a couple of questions I had already. I did have a question because community is they're looking at us looking at opening up some of these codes and making them, what is the word? Work. That'll be the word. But there's questions around like looking at, does this provide another opportunity to like look at some of the other things that are in that code? For instance, like when we're looking at like the special needs housing code update, it's in a similar document that includes things like detention centers and the like. And so does it make sense? Is it strategic to look at those other things while we're looking at these documents, or is that helpful at all to you guys?
As a general statement, I would say yes. I mean, as Steve mentioned, it's not uncommon that these projects incorporate numerous topics, numerous state laws that they're trying to implement, like parking. There's probably 5 bills related to parking that are all going to play out in that parking code update conversation. So absolutely in general, I will say specifically, because I know there's been recent conversations about special needs housing and detention centers. Those generally aren't in the same category. And so the current project that's moving forward regarding special needs housing does not address or modify anything related to detention centers, and that conversation is not currently in the scope.
But it could be, or it should be? I guess that's my question.
My sense would be if the council wanted to have a conversation about detention centers, it probably deserves its own project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rumbaugh.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you so much for bringing this forward. Since I don't sit on IPS, I don't get to hear all of these. So thanks so much for bringing them all forward. There's a couple, first off, I want to say I'm really excited about the one where they changed the small dwelling units to 1,200, because obviously before it was, I think, 400. Is that what it was? And that's why we're getting all those micro units. So I'm excited about that. Yes, that's a win, because maybe we'll get units that fit the size of families, so families can actually live downtown, which would be great. And then I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, before I get to my question about transit-oriented development and train horns, which I've gotten a whole bunch of emails about recently. Could you just talk a little bit about the condo, changes to the condos, warranties, and like what that means?
Yeah, so I guess the quick version is now with the 2 bills, I think the state's been trying to address the same issue. There is traditionally in condos, there's an implied warranty basically against defects, construction defects, which created all sorts of liability and legal concerns over many decades now of challenges where residents have brought cases against builders, sometimes quite a bit after the construction. That's what created the liability insurance challenge that made it very expensive to build condominiums. What the state has been looking at, and particularly with smaller buildings, is trying to create a mechanism to have what they call an expressed warranty, which basically is you're going to tell them what your warranty for how long, and it has to meet certain basic criteria, that can then be utilized instead of the implied warranty, which is much broader and less defined. So I think the idea is that will help streamline and clarify what the liability actually is so that that the insurance can be much more tailored to what the true risk.
Because I know that the issue has been to get these insured, you've had to use private funds. You weren't able to get some of the loans that you'd like to get in the bank. And there was like a timeline of 7 years before you could actually, those went away. And so what I'm thinking is, this is really important because we're running out of property and land, and the ability to build up and have the ability to buy a unit as a condo, I think is really important, and especially in this city, as we're talking about development. I'm hoping that we can get this kind of worked out. I think it's really important as I see us finding ways around it. I think like Home in Tacoma 2 is a way around it by all the units that people can put on a property, but wouldn't it be better if you could just build up? It's like neater, And I know I think affordability wise, there would be people who could actually afford to buy something. So okay. So then the other thing was, in transit-oriented development areas, I think there is this conversation about the several different intersections and the trains going through. When our former city manager was here, I heard that you needed to, in order to have it so they didn't blow the horn through the 4 intersections in the Dome District, I think there's 4. I could be wrong. There might be less, but I think there's 4. In order to have a quiet zone, we would have to pay $2 million. And that was like 2.5 years ago when I asked about it, or maybe 3 years ago. So I'm curious if this could be something that's written into TOD zones, that there's the option, instead of the city having to pay for it, finding a way that there's like another way to fund for this. Because Sound Transit used to have the authority, was the one who could do it, and then they said, no, we're not doing it anymore, you have to pay for it. So I would love to have more information around that, because this is going to be a bigger issue as we start to see more development. And I think I'm really excited about it, but I also am thinking about people who live there and making it easier for them to sleep at night. So something's happening over that I don't know what's happening over on Star Street, over in Stadium, in Old Town, where they have a system that's set up where it's supposed to blow the horn. And now they're blowing the actual train horns as they go through, and it's 4 times a night. And so I really think this is something, it would be great to talk about transit-oriented areas.
Yeah, I will just quickly say that rail-related safety regulations is a whole other world with all kinds of, I'm sure, interesting history and standards. We could certainly follow up on that and talk more about the conversations that have happened in the Dome area.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, thank you so much for your testimony. All right. Moving on. Our next topic is the interim city manager final report out and draft city manager work plan discussions. It's a call on city manager Hyun Kim. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Ibsen, Deputy Mayor, members of council. I am here after 2 consultations with OSAC members of this council. In your packet and for the public, there are 2 versions of the draft city manager work plan, a clean version as well as a track changed version whereupon changes have been provided with input from council members individually. And I can speak to the fact that I've briefly touched base with every member of this council just briefly in my weekly briefings. And even last night, I received some feedback that I'd like to include in my presentation today. Mayor Ibsen, I would like to just go through this version, the clean version, and just start from the top.
Please.
And I will pause at each of the prerogatives, the work plan themes, and take questions at that time, if that works. So starting off with the introductory statement here, the statement would read as reflected in the introduction here for the work plan, what it is and what is not. This work plan outlines the City Council's expectations for the City Manager to focus and prioritize efforts to drive results throughout the organization to benefit the community on behalf of the City Council. This work plan is intended to provide Council with a focused list of goals, metrics, initiatives to determine how well the City Manager is expecting or meeting expectations in relation to community context as well as conditions. So speaking to the qualitative there, the City Manager is directed to complete these items with an emphasis on partnership with local jurisdictions, labor partners, and community partners, increasing access, advancing opportunity, centering belonging for all Tacoma community members, leveraging the equity index to provide emphasis in low opportunity zones. Also utilizing data-informed approaches with the balance of qualitative and quantitative accountability and focused communication. Heard that loud and clear through council throughout this process, and cross-departmental alignment and coordination, leveraging all relevant resources of the organization in the day-to-day operations of the city. So the first metric is themed around organizational performance and internal administration. And we have a intro here on operational excellence, leading the organization to promote a healthy, stable workforce that delivers on council's priorities while implementing internal process improvements, cost containment, and efficiency measures in 2026 as we work to structurally align revenues and expenses to ensure sustainable delivery of city services in future years. The first metric is on fiscal sustainability. The city manager will implement cost containment, efficiencies, and revenue growth ideas to generate $5 million in 2026 and reduce the structural deficit in the 27-28 budget. So this is a tall order. The first thing I'd like to speak to is a great comment I received last night regarding the timing element of that column next to each of these initiatives. The question prompt was, what does that timing represent? And as I was explaining it, realized, yeah, there probably should be, most of these timing elements are in line to initiatives or efforts that start or will be reported by that time or finished by that time, anticipated. So perhaps maybe in a final draft, I can come back with where those timing elements would line up, start, reflect, and finish. I think that was a great input there. So I will make that change. Initiatives under the performance metric for sustainability, maintain and expand existing general government hiring freeze by Q2. So we're right in that window. Conduct organizational business model facilities and operational reviews to identify structural changes and or reorganizations as necessary. I would be planning to come back to council and the public sometime in Q2, Q3. So sometime in that May, June, perhaps late summer portion to come back to you. This would align with your budget efforts as well, that any reorganizations that I would be proposing would be in alignment with potentially something we could do now, but more in line with January 1, 27, 28 with the biennium. So, and then provide council with a clearly articulated decision-making approach, rubric, and or guidance for how budget decisions, including restructuring, will be made. So sustainability, durability, any changes we make, especially with our labor partners, our employees, how is that going to set us up for success into the future? So that's in line with the budget as well. And then update council on a portfolio of structural changes, additional changes. I know that there are dynamic efforts that are on the work plan of council committees between GPFC and CVS, conversations that we would be having and direction we'll be receiving related to administrative support of our CBCs across the city. So those kinds of things sometime in Q3. I'll pause here on this first metric, Mayor, or would you like me to finish out this theme?
How about we do the first bucket and then we can do half.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Perfect. The second metric is in relation to just service delivery. To ensure sustainable delivery of city services to the community, the city manager will promote a healthy, stable workforce and lead the roadmap to recovery to structurally align revenues and expenses by 2030. So what we start today in terms of the structural gap, we've identified many years. We have a gap, and it's going to take us more than just a year or two to align our cost containment measures as well as our partnerships with our labor unions as well as community partners to ensure that we have a way in which we can actually structurally solve for X, which is our gap. So the initiatives here, design a proposal for guiding a potential community task force to provide community input and co-create options for long-term structural sustainability. This would be something that we'd potentially start now. I need to preface this that this may be a little bit premature because as we're working through making some cost containment measures for 26, we won't have the full I guess, options for council in the budget until probably later this summer, so that a task force of sorts, if the council wants to launch that effort, that group from the community would most likely be validating what we're doing to say, we've vetted this, we have questions. That may not start until next year, potentially. So I may revise this timeline in reflection and consultation with you. The second one is identify structural changes for implementation 27 and out, and begin public engagement throughout the budget development. This is to say, as we're working through the budget and we're looking at service delivery changes, potentially, any impacts to the public, we need to start talking to the public about, especially those groups that we may be impacting. A good example is that at the mid-mod, at the budget amendment for last year, we made some changes with the support of council when it came to service delivery for our seniors, for programming in partnership with Parks Tacoma. So this is a group, would be an example that we'd be out and speaking to and engaging from our budget office, the city manager's office, and from council as well. Okay. Other initiatives along this theme, establish a community-facing cost containment dashboard to public report on items such as expense to revenue growth, structural balance, and personnel and benefits growth. So we just need to start putting this information out in an easily discernible way in which, as you know, we use some visualizations for our budget. We should do the same for our roadmap to recovery potential. This is where our progress report will be going on the board. The next item is work with the city council to incorporate updated fund balance and policy reserves into a structurally balanced budget policy, perhaps, for potential next year. This council, the council before, great stewardship of what we're doing here, has a very robust fund balance policy. Perhaps we need to discuss a structurally balanced budget policy going forward as we're making the inroads with the structural deficit. The next item is support the development of a ballot measure aimed at creating a stable funding for safe and connected streets, our streets initiative effort. This is a potential 26-27 prerogative that the city manager's office would support that effort with our public works team and all other departments that are working on this. And then the last metric under here, initiative, conduct a review of 2026 internal employee satisfaction results, anticipated to take place sometime in December of 26, and then develop an action plan in collaboration with the city council to improve organizational culture. As we are making changes potentially, and as I am speaking to my colleagues and the employees that I serve as well, I want to get a firm baseline in terms of a survey. I do anticipate that survey will be difficult as we're making changes and role clarity and working with our partners, our labor partners, our employees, getting that baseline established by the end of this year, and then developing a plan to continually work towards morale and improve conditions for our employees. And then the last performance metric under this section, to promote transparent, timely communications internally and externally, the city manager will work with media and communications, the OSAC committee, citywide leadership to improve the impact of our internal and external communications. Tell the story of Tacoma. This is a carry forward from the interim work plan. The initiative would be sometime now, we're starting this continually, to support the city council in their specific community engagement and communication needs. The city manager will work with the committee to propose an implementable model for council staffing in the 27-28 budget development process, council staffing. The next initiative is along continued advanced media and communications transition to a digital first strategy and implementation of the 2022 communication audit report, which Director Clancy will be reporting after my presentation today, as far as how it will adhere to this. And then moving forward that transition, how do we support our MCO group to ensure that they can support the council tomorrow as well. The last initiative, or I'm sorry, the last few here, continue to provide quarterly updates to the city council on our digital communication data analytics and resulting strategies. So the report out, how do we report out on the methodology upon which are we penetrating, are we getting our story out, and trying a lot of new things. That permissive environment, what I've heard from council is, as you're working with Director Clancy and her team, try different things. Let's go short form, let's digital first, let's start moving towards that way. How do we report that in a way in which we can report that, not just in the quarterly reports, but in other ways as well. Another carry forward from the interim work plan is the weekly report. I reported to OSAC on Friday. This is a carryover. The city council has in years past requested somewhat of a, it's still dynamic. The report is generated on a weekly basis. We provide a PDF file that we provide to our constituents, your constituents. Perhaps it's time to take a look at a way in which we can actually put on a dynamic page, a landing page where folks can take a look at interactive data, dashboards, infographics, and more information that's more distillable. It's almost like that tagline, if you want to know more, you start here and then you click through on the webpage, perhaps, to get more information from the items that are coming out of the weekly report, so that more folks are getting more utility out of the weekly report. Another carry forward is the public comment briefing. This is in large part with council. As you're working towards council rule changes and other ways to get into district for meetings, we are also going to be supporting in terms of developing an after-action briefing on comments that are made in public, just to really close up that gap with, I've made a comment to council, I've come to redress or receive some redress from council. It seems very one-sided. How can we use that to share out, this is what we're hearing, this is what the council's hearing, this is what the city's hearing? That's something that we could be working towards as we look towards next year with your plans. And then also from a constituent relations standpoint, Carissa Matheson, our amazing coordinator, working on with the council, of all the input you're receiving, the intake you're receiving through email, phone calls, how do we capture that and report that out to the community as well? So that's something we'd work towards here in the next year as well. So I will pause there.
Thank you, City Manager. Yeah, with this first bucket here with the internal processes, deceptively ambitious and bold, I must say. I'm a really big fan of the fact that there's such an emphasis on culture, on structural and systematic responsiveness to just what frontline, mid-level, and people up and down the chain of command are talking about. That's just good governance and it's good for morale. I really appreciate the focus on timelines. With the first and the other metrics, such as a start as well as a finish timeline, that's really good for broadcasting certainty to the community and the workforce. That's very important. Really buried the lead that we're talking about curing the structural deficit in 4 years. That's incredible. That's very important to shoot for the moon there, so I very much support that. And Mike, not a request for revision, but just a clarification. We're talking about pretty robust public engagement for the road to recovery, focus on the structural deficit. Can you talk more about with the current budget process that we're embarking for 27-28, what the public engagement is going to look like, and how we're going to robustly start that off, and what you're envisioning there and when you're envisioning that?
Mayor Ibsen, that's a great question. So right now, our internal service departments are all making plans for potential reorganizations as well as some reduction exercises that they're working through. From those, we'll move to the external departments for general government. Sometime in the June timeframe, we'll be hitting the ground running with all of our community partners that we report on. This is going to be different. I think we're going to be doing not just what we've done in years past and just continuing that standpoint of going out to the community and saying, here's the budget calendar, here's what we're looking at doing. We also want to work towards having that deliberate process of speaking to our recovery plans too. And just a level set with our community partners, our residents, as they're hearing in other forums. We're going to go out. I believe we have a list of groups that I would convey to you after this meeting, to the full council, of the groups we plan on engaging directly with. But there's also a lot of areas where we're not touching from the standpoint of if there's a mystery to how the budget is developed, our engagement efforts have to go directly towards that. So speaking to our amazing team at OMB, our budget office and our finance team, as well as perhaps other teams that will be leaning in to help support this engagement process. Let me come back to you and speak to that directly.
Fantastic.
I can get you the list, though, as far as who we're going to be talking to, and then who are we missing, and having that engagement with you all, as are we missing the mark here? Are there other groups that we should be speaking to as well?
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a number of council questions, and keep in mind we have a second section here for city council priorities for the work plan. So starting with Councilmember Walker, followed by Councilmember Diaz.
Thank you, Mayor. quick clarification. I understand, and thank you for the little note on the top of this one, that this is like our changes over time. And I've got a clean one, and then we just passed out this one with the blue marks.
I just passed that out.
Oh, this is your proposal?
my proposal.
Okay, great, thank you. Just wanted to be oriented to that. I have spent lots of time with you in OSAC on this, so I'm not going to get into a lot of details, but I do just want to make sure, and I think we just have a little ways to go in terms of making sure we're identifying what's the city manager's job and what is our job or the staff's job. Things like bringing forward ideas for revenue growth is your job, and it's our job to balance the budget, right? Like, so I think being really clear on those things, what we're holding you accountable to, and what we get to and need to decide in terms of policy. So I think there's just a little bit of cleanup still to do so that it's really clear to anybody who's reading it for the first time. But I feel really good, after all the time we've spent in OSAC about the content of this, so I'll let other folks weigh in for further detail.
Thank you. Councilmember Diaz, followed by Councilmember Palmer.
Thank you. Thank you, City Manager and OSAC Committee, for all your work on this document. I have to be very blunt with you and tell you I don't like it. It doesn't work for me. There is a lot of content in here that is in line with the values and priorities that this council has set. But I think there's a lot of things in here that are not worded in a way that give the administration the flexibility they need to solve problems as they arise. And there's things in here that are trying to be quantifiably measured but are subjective. I think one of the examples that sticks out the most to me is, just through broad looking at it, sticks out first to me is this bullet on number 2, that says protect the health and safety of all Tacomans by increasing urban tree canopy. It goes on from there. I think that is a big council priority. We all want that. That's why we have increased funding for our urban tree canopy department. That's why we're working on tree code and IPS, but there's no quantifiable way to measure the increase in tree canopy in Tacoma if DNR is not funded, which I just happen to know because that's my day job, with their LIDAR program. And so there's no way for us to know when they will be funded for that, when we'll be able to get that metric back. Doesn't account for when people are topping trees versus when we're planting trees. That is not a quantifiable thing that would make sense for me in a document that should, in my mind, be broader than this. The other one that sticks out to me, just so I'm pulling forward examples, is the first bullet in this section that says bring forward revised ordinance and enforcement approach for code compliance. I am just the alternate, but it's my understanding that work is happening in CVS, so I'm not sure why it would land in the city manager's work plan. That seems strange to me. And then I just now realized that I'm looking at Councilmember Palmer's proposal rather than the city manager's proposal, but there are some things that she's proposing that I also don't think belong here, particularly this one about the CBC work plans being in line with advancing council priorities. This is just far more prescriptive than I think we're going to be able to address in an annual performance review in a transparent way for the public, without making sort of different excuses or different things. I feel like we should lean closer to where the performance metrics are, maybe the top bullets in here, but not any of these initiatives. They don't seem to make sense, and they don't incorporate all the work that we're doing in committees and as a council, and emerging topics that will inevitably come up in the next 3 years through the end of the 2028 contract that we have before us. So this format is concerning to me.
Thank you. Councilmember Palmer, unless you'd like to respond to that, City Manager?
Yeah, Councilmember Diaz, thank you very much. I should have led at the top, a work plan that is both ambitiously broad stroke, but ambiguous perhaps. How do I say this with some brevity here? In my experience, the performance evaluation of a city manager, as much as I would love to have, I really appreciate this dialogue. I think this is where we just need to get to the point of what would you like to measure me on? And if you're looking at this from the standpoint of those examples, I'm happy to seek the consensus of this body to see if that's something you'd like to be taken off to be more measurable in that way. I think there's the notion of the performance of a city manager that's based on the totality of the performance. And sometimes it is about, it is subjective. And so what I did not speak about in service to what you also shared, Councilmember Diaz, is there are so many efforts. A good example of that is Brian and Stephen Atkinson. They just presented to you the work plan for the planning group with all the potential mandates that are coming down from the state. If I'm not supporting that group with Allison, that's also something that you'll be evaluating me that's not spoken to here as well. I'm trying to reflect that as well. So I guess I'm not speaking to that, just adding that commentary, Mayor
Sure,
Epson.
of course, and I appreciate that. And
I should also maybe be a little bit clearer that my feedback is quite frankly for my council colleagues, not for the city manager. I don't think that anything that you have proposed that should be included or not included in here is the problem. I actually think the expectations that we're trying to set as a body don't make sense because they don't necessarily align up with everything that we do and everything the council has currently sort of put forward. It feels out of line, and maybe it's just because I'm not an OSAC, so I didn't have time to go through this. But having first real public eyes on this, I don't think this is ready for prime time.
thank you for your comments. And just if I can maybe provide some helpful context for how the OSAC process went. The intention behind all of this structuring was for it to begin and end with staff perspective. So just to be abundantly clear, while this did incorporate feedback from the general consensus from the City Council retreat and from our iteration here subsequently in study session, the way this conversation began was charging the city manager with interpreting the council's overall emphasis, because this isn't about saying things are unimportant. It's about not everything being equally important, and fundamentally this really being a question of what gets an over-representation of money and staff time as interpreted by the city manager. And this is also, frankly, the city manager's interpretation of that, and also what Hyun basically told us is a reasonable goal for us to judge him by, plus or minus some council feedback. So this wasn't just simply the council or committee members plopping goals in front of the city manager and saying, good luck, get this done, so much as this is a general emphasis. What do you think is a reasonable way of achieving this? And then some give and take. This is absolutely a living document, though, so this isn't something to be perceived as set in stone, but just out of an abundance of clarity for how the process went in the OSAC committee. The other thing I would say, just in the context of evaluation, is that any fair, objective evaluation is also going to account for force majeure factors. So if a council or any other body sets a goal for, say, tree canopy or pavement of certain numbers of streets and so forth, and then the rug gets pulled out from under us because of a government shutdown or state funding going away, for example, that absolutely can and should and will be a factor because we have to be fair and we have to just be abundantly clear about how that works. Is there anything to that you'd like to add, City Manager, just about overall process?
I actually think that from whether this is ready to go today or if it can be with the additional iteration of changing this to a place where you can all be comfortable, I would candidly use this also from the potential quarterly report back. This is, to your point, Mayor Ibsen, the force majeure provision of a performance contingency upon which council, this is where I've led with our staff. Here's the reason why this is not working out. I would like to make sure to revise the work plan on writing, so that so that the public also is aware that come 6 months or a year later, when I come back and say this is why those conditions were met. But it also dynamically allows me to work with the staff to pivot as well. If we're not doing this because of this, what is in our control and how can we pivot to that?
And if I'm understanding correctly, City Manager, today is not the finalization of this work plan. This is basically the daylighting of what was once in committee to now the full council for further refinement, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Palmer, followed by Councilmember Sedalke.
Thank you. So this was co-created, right? Like you had a lot of input into the format and goals?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just curious. I guess I'm looking at, do you have something similar to this with your employees as far as a way to, like a work plan and something that they would have to follow that you would then
Actually, to say,
refer to?
so my plan is that if I can have something finalized here in the coming weeks, I would be taking offline all of our directors in town and make sure to spend half a day or a day to translate how this will be executed. So it will be directly from not just this, not just the budget, but council priorities as well. So there's concurrent priority setting that is happening all the time.
But it's a normal thing that you would
It
do
is
with
normal.
like your employees, right? Is
Yeah,
to
with my
have-
colleagues and my team, yes.
Okay. And you are our only employee, correct? As
That's
city
correct.
council?
That's correct.
Okay. So I feel like this makes sense to me as far as like having measurable, especially since it's been co-created and it's not, as Mayor said, just kind of coming out of nowhere. These are things that have been thought through, and maybe the timing makes sense to change in that, but I think it makes absolute sense to have measurable goals for you to attain to. And in your contract, it does include, or possible contract, right? There's mention of the force majeure, whatever language that is, that we would definitely take into consideration if there were circumstances that it affected this. Is that correct?
That's correct. And
Sorry, I'm
that-
being a lawyer right now.
That's the partnership that I seek and that I've received in confirmation and to this point with a potential contract.
Thanks for that clarification. So yeah, I didn't send, but we put together we had talked yesterday about some of these things that I've highlighted in blue here in this version that are recommendations and things that, again, this is, I'm understanding this is a conversation that we're all having, that I saw I would be interested in changing around. One thing that's not on here, we did talk about yesterday that this is really a document for us, it's for you, but it's also for the public. And so thank you for thinking about the timing and making that more clear. One thing that we also talked about was, the things that maybe aren't in here that are just kind of automatically a part of your work, which would be like some of the things that we talked about earlier, like the state changes, the mandates. And so maybe including like a disclaimer in here saying that those are the things that are just not included in here, so that the public understands that those are still part of your work, but it's just not part of your work plan. That's a suggestion. And then, yeah, so my suggestion, like in this first, the blue, and I did this because there's no real way to kind of point through, so I'm hoping this is helpful for my colleagues to see where I think the changes should or could go. But I'm all in favor of our goals being based on measures of success. And then to the point that Councilmember Diaz was talking about with the ensuring the CBC work plans are in line with advancing council priorities and Tacoma 2035 goals. I really see you, you're steering the ship, right? You're steering the ship on how we get to reaching our goals and how you address council priorities. So I don't see this as something that you're like day-to-day you're involved with. I see it as, okay, this is our end goal. It's your job as city manager to get us to an end goal. So making sure that something like that's included in here makes sense to me. And we did kind of talk about that yesterday. And then some of this is just language. On the support council members in their specific community, to support council members in their specific community engagement, communication needs. We're talking about council staff, looking at council staffing. I just wanted to make sure that that didn't just touch on those two things. Like there could be other things that are involved in our roles that we might need staffing help with. And so that's why I changed it to add and broader role fulfillment needs. And that's it for that section. Then I'll go through the rest when we go to the next section.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Sadalge.
Is there any feedback from city manager?
Oh, yes.
No, I'm in receive of Councilor Palmer. Yeah.
No, you're good. I was just making sure that you could be heard.
Your mic's not on.
It's off now. Okay. Councilor Sidalga?
Yeah, I was just collecting my thoughts. I'm going to try to keep it to this section one. A couple of my comments, I think, have to do with the entire kind of document. It's the first time I'm seeing all of it together right now. I do share many of Councilmember Diaz's concerns. I do appreciate Councilmember Walker pointing out that there needs to be a little more clarification on what is the purview of the council versus the city manager. Because there are some words, some sentences without enough qualifiers, I think, are talking about policy debates we really need to have before we have it as a goal. So when I look at this, you know, I'm generally okay with the top level sections that are in the performance metric sections, those blue or purple, whatever you want to call that color, depending on which sheet you're looking at. With the initiatives being very detailed kind of things that are going to support those goals. And so I don't think we really need to have all those initiatives right now because that's going to change over time. So when I think about the operational excellence thing, obviously, yes, budget is big, right? You know, when I think about a city manager, what's your primary responsibility? You're supposed to deliver us a balanced budget with options. That should be a goal. Deliver me a balanced budget with options to talk about what can change. And those options go into the second section because everything with that budget is going to affect individuals who work here, right? Because they're combined, you know, budget with options. By the way, this also leads to, if you want to do this option, it's going to constrain our ability to do X. You know, to do Y, we can't do X. That's just basically what our budget is. So this idea of getting rid of a structural deficit, I don't think is something that, quite frankly, you can do. And in many ways, we as a council are very limited in doing it because a structural deficit is generally the fact that our revenues do not grow with inflation. And with a war and everything, we got more inflation coming, right? So what I'd like to see is what kind of flexibility can be built in here in that goal. Deliver a balanced budget with options for our priorities that we get to discuss. Explain to us what the implications are. That, to me, that's the job that you should be doing right now. And also be cognizant of explaining to us, you know, not that you can, but when you can, the craziness that's coming upon us in the next year or two, because we got a state budget that's going to affect our budget, we got a federal budget that's affecting our budget, we got an economy that affects our budget. So on a regular cadence, which gets to the first point which I wanted, like, what is the cadence that's expected in us? So let's start with that. That's the easy one. All of that was preamble. What's the cadence in updating us?
So with the budget that's going on, it's most likely a monthly update to you as we're formulating the budget. For the budget. But as far as a report out from the work plan, we have discussed maybe quarterly. What's normal is 6 months to a year.
I think quarterly would be really fast, 6 months if we're really lucky. I think on a budget level, we definitely need a faster turnaround, just my opinion, because the budget really just affects everything.
It does.
Right? The health and welfare of people, I think it's really important that we do a survey, but I think, you know, whether we do a hiring freeze or not is slightly more of a policy question, because the real question is, if you want this council member, this is what we can't do, because that's how our budget is. So am I good with the stuff on the purple one, I think it needs some wordsmithing, but those are some relatively good, higher level goals. Get me a budget that's balanced with options. You know, understand how that budget and those budget decisions will also affect our organizational effectiveness and the people that do the work, because that's intricately connected. And let's help communicate what it actually means, because there are a lot of people that interpret things in what we do in those policies. So those 3 high-level goals on this operational stuff, if that's what we mean by that, great. All the bullets underneath, that's going to change over time. It's going to change over time with how the world changes. So to me, great, but those might as well just be, you know, for right now, these are some of the initiatives we're looking at in council. I do specifically agree with Councilmember Diaz about the CBC work plans. That is with subcommittees talking directly with CBC chairs. That's where that lies. Staff does what that work plan is. That's a very small thing, but I'm looking more for these higher level strategic goals that helps us get flexibility in how we operate going forward, and a regular cadence to tell us, hey, this thing changed and now we have an issue with reaching this thing that we all agreed on. Because we as council members, we get really, and I'm guilty of this, we love shiny new objects. We forget about all the work that we've asked council to do over the years, and we're still asking them to do and haven't gotten reviews, and then we sometimes think that, you know, we can just go for something new. We need to be, you know, also kept in check with the finite reality is in order to do X, Y is not going to get done. That's all I got.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Hines?
Ooh, all right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to shift the conversation just a hair, because I think one of the things I'm struggling with right now is this is our work plan. It's not Hyun's work plan for him to tell us like what he wants us to do. It's our job as 9 people to figure out what we want the city manager to do. So I'm struggling with the conversation of, what do you think about what I want you to do? And then you signing off on my approach when I think we should be talking with each other. Like, if I want something on the work plan, I got to talk to all of you all about why it needs to be on the work plan, not ask the city manager for his permission to add it to the work plan. So I guess, Mr. Mayor, kicking back to you for the conversation moving ahead is, one of the values of OSAC was we sat down and we went through it line by line and said, hey, what do you think about this? And we kind of wordsmithed and we talked about it. And it wasn't a parallel play, it was an actual co-creation. And what I'm worried right now is we're drifting into kind of a parallel play where everybody kind of fed their thoughts to Hyun and Ben, and they regurgitated it, that's a bad term. They gave it back to us, and instead of like going through, like I would love to go through and have Councilmember Palmer tell me why each one of these things needs to be on the work plan, and then I could ask questions and talk to her about what I think, whether it should be there or not. Because at the end of the day, this is our plan as 9 people, and I do think it's important to be fed by information from the city manager, but I would much prefer if we either spent the time from right now talking amongst ourselves about what we wanted the work plan to be, or to simply read this and go off and have a conversation someplace else about it. Because I don't think us going back and forth and just asking the city manager about each piece line by line is actually a productive use of our time. So, Mr. Mayor, I kick that one to you.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Hines. And I think that's a very sensible way of looking at it, and which was very much the ethos behind the OSAC committee, because at the end of the day, I'm pretty literalist about this, that this is not the city council's work plan, this is the city manager's work plan. Our strategic work plan was what we talked about at the University of Puget Sound and fleshed out here at study session, and ultimately, I mean, you're talking about 9 people with 15 different opinions. At the end of the day, consensus really matters, but this is ultimately about not building a Christmas tree with everyone's preferences, because I have a fair amount of things I care about that didn't necessarily make the cut here, or with little sticky notes at UPS, and it's not a reflection of the merit of any ideas I or anyone else have. But ultimately, especially given the scarce budget conditions and just the current realities, one, this is fundamentally about the city manager's interpretation of what we have already said are our top priorities collectively, so that box is already checked, frankly. And secondly, this is about giving the autonomy and creative control to staff to run with this and to define what they believe are reasonable goals with consensus and feedback, But ultimately, you know, for lack of a better term, this is about allowing staff to have the autonomy to run with this. So that's my interpretation. I mean, I will defer to the city manager about what the appropriate timeline is for further fleshing out and wordsmithing. Definitely abundantly sympathetic to folks' concerns about what initiatives make or don't make it, or whether we should even have initiatives at all. But ultimately, my own one of 9 perspective on this is that this is fundamentally about staff's interpretation of what we have already stated are our top priorities. And then speaking from my own prior experience in the council, I mean, I frankly don't remember city manager work plans being that long and drawn out. They're ultimately something that is the product of conversation the council has already made and already indicated our top priorities, and then just giving staff the free rein to do that. That is my particular take on it, but I absolutely welcome staff feedback. Do you have anything to add on that before we move on to the deputy mayor?
I'll hold until all the comments.
Sure. And we do have an additional section, and we have a lengthy closed session as well, so just keeping that in mind. Deputy mayor?
Let me give Councilmember Hunt.
Oh, please.
I mean, I guess then my question would be, what would be the difference between a city manager's work plan and the council's work plan for the city manager? Because I think what I'm perceiving from listening is that the city manager took our priorities and developed this, but council members are not feeling that it's reflective of what they want to see or not. So where is the venue by which we would discuss whether this meets our needs as a collective body for directing the work of the city manager? Because what I want to avoid is any kind of ambiguity, right? And I don't, what I would be concerned about is a city manager picking one thing off of this that was one single council member's idea and saying, I demonstrated this metric because I did this thing, and then to have 7 of us or 6 of us say, look, well, none of us wanted that. And so how did we get to this as being like the driving force? So I guess my question would be because I guess I do see this as part of, like, it's our work plan for the city manager versus kind of his specific work plan, unless your interpretation is that he wrote this, gave it to us, and we're just supposed to say, go for it.
Sure, and not that extreme, Councilmember Hines. I do think that ultimately staff is smart enough to read the tea leaves. I think this is a consensus culture with that. And again, to reiterate, and I welcome feedback and any input from the city manager as well, is that today is not the finalization. It says the word draft on the paper in front of us. All today represents is taking a document that was made in a committee to study session to have 5 other people look at it. That is the only objective for today, with further refinement and feedback, staff interpreting, and at a further point in time for us to bring the conversation back and refine it until there is a general consensus, which isn't to be conflated with everyone being 100% happy, but a general consensus that staff has sufficient clarity on. That is, again, my own interpretation. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor, and I just appreciate City Manager, all the work that you've done, as well as OSAC and everybody else that's had input on this, and really great conversation. I think, at least from my perspective, for me, the purple areas are the goals that really the council has outlined, as I understand it from what during our different conversations at the retreat, as well as within our strategic priorities as a council. And it's my understanding that the initiatives that you put under there are kind of like your idea on how to accomplish those goals. Am I reading that correctly?
It's both, and there's been the initiatives have grown from the conversations through OSAC and consultations with individual council members. Mm-hmm. So it's both, and I think, and I'll hold. I've got some thoughts as well as productive next steps.
Okay, I guess I'm not. The thing that I'm focusing in on is the purple stuff, right? For me, my perspective is the initiatives. This is how you're going to get there, but that's kind of internal to yourself on what you want to do, and you're trying to be transparent with the council of what those initiatives are, based on the goals that you're trying to achieve within the purples. I guess I'm thinking also maybe about so if we were to take, you still continue with the initiatives internally on your own, but what are the goals? What are going to be the metrics of success at the purple portion, right? So what are we going to be measuring for what success looks like within those purple areas? Those initiatives obviously support those goals, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I want to see how do I get to those goals? I don't know, going around about here. But that's kind of what I'm thinking about is like, what are the metrics of success? And so I almost feel like where initiatives is in here, kind of, it should be like, here's the metrics of success, how we know we've gotten to this point of this goal. Yeah, almost illustrative.
Illustrative.
Yeah, and the initiatives are just what you're doing to, and then, but we need to find out what those metrics are and how we're gonna, all the external pressures obviously as caveats, but, that's at least what I'm thinking of, and I do appreciate you adding the initiatives in here, but I think it's to remember that's in support of the purple, the goals, because that might give us ideas on, hey, maybe we need to reprioritize in some areas, or you have a better, broader understanding of some of the initiatives that are going on internally, that might be able to align with some other policy recommendations or work that the council as a body is doing as well. And so, or maybe we notice something's missing. It's like, actually, did you think about this as you were going through your initiatives that you're working on? So that's just kind of thoughts I had on that. I'm happy to take any feedback or thoughts from others. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Oh,
Councilmember Rumbaugh.
I'm going to just 100% what Councilmember Bushnell said. I think the initiatives, they change. Like, we are like the ocean going in and out, and we decide all of a sudden something changes, and we may not have as much control over why it changes. It might be because the federal government didn't send CBDG money to us, and then we have to like shift how we're doing things. I think being less prescriptive here makes sense to have, for me, that's what I think, but I really feel like I want to put this back on the mayor, because there was another way to do this, and it's not really you, it's really the mayor sitting down, setting up meetings. It's Councilmember Palmer, if she wants to make changes, making meetings with us to tell us what her changes are, rather than coming here, which I don't think at the last minute we're supposed to be making decisions on your work plan, which I think one of the issues here is that we've just sort of rushed through this. It feels rushed, and I know for the people sitting on OSAC, they don't think it feels rushed, but when you've been sitting in a meeting, working on something together, and then you bring it here, it's just a different, it just gives us less, I mean, no matter how much time I've had sitting outside of council to do this, I think it's good that if the mayor would lead something with separate council members to sit down and talk about, why did OSAC decide to do this? Why is this in here? And I think always giving you more flexibility makes you more successful. I also want you to be able to like try things, and if you fail, you fail. But if we're going to tell you everything we think, I mean, you're kind of guessing based on what happened at our meeting. Maybe it changes, is what I'm saying. And so I like to have less, be more. And I appreciate that we want to have measurables. I think that that's great. I also think that some things aren't measurable in the same way that you can have a number or data. It might be more elusive. And so I want to say, I appreciate you brought this forward and it's been worked on, but right at this moment, I'm not supporting approving something. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rumbaugh. Councilmember Scott.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, City Manager, for sharing this. I feel like I know that the mayor has the privilege of being the one of us who's working full time, and I know that we, the four of us and alternate, have but mostly the four of us have the privilege of sitting on OSAC. I will say that also, like, even with that, if you're just seeing this today, that's a choice in some ways, because it's not like it wasn't sent prior. This didn't just materialize out of nowhere. It's a continuation of a work plan that was started last year. And so I understand that it feels, there are times where something comes to study session, I'm like, oh, I wish I had learned about that sooner. Things happen, and they don't always and I get it that this committee is a little bit different than some of our other standing committees. But I think that we are working on this is not news. And if you want to get a deeper understanding, yes, the mayor can reach out. Yes, the city manager can reach out. Yes, Councilmember Palmer can reach out, but so can you all. So we all have a responsibility to understand I might not know what's going on in every committee, but there's only a few things that we are working on in OSAC at any given time. And I'm not saying that you have to know our exact agenda all the time, but this is not new. So if there was any type of input, concern, or anything that was specific to this work plan, this is not the first time this work plan has been shared. It's not the first time it's been talked about. So I understand that you feel that there may be some responsibility for the mayor to reach out on some of these things. But I also feel that we all have that responsibility to reach out to each other. I think with Councilmember Palmer, yes, she could have done that way, but I think because this is a discussion, it's not a decision point, this is a great time to bring up points for discussion. She could have not brought this specific thing and just shared those thoughts, and maybe it would have felt less formal. She's just somebody who having a physical document might help her, and it also is a reference point for you all. So I feel like that there's just a better way of going about this discussion, and I think it's being taken as we are telling you that you have to do this right now, and there is no choice. We are not voting on anything. This is a discussion. This is the time for you to share your thoughts about what should or should not be in here. I know you did, but you did it in a way that is putting the responsibility on somebody else. When you have a voice to say, hey, before this moment, you knew this was going to be on the agenda today, and if you didn't, that's because you didn't look at your report or whatever that said what was going to be coming up. But this is something that has been out there that if you wanted before this moment to see this document, you could have. If you wanted to have these conversations, you could have. So I just don't like when we have these moments of things that feel like we're just making, like, you're making a lot of assumptions about people's intention instead of saying, giving a little grace and saying, this is a discussion point. I am feeling this way, but this is also my opportunity right now to chime in on this discussion. Because again, it's a discussion. This is not a decision point. So you don't necessarily need to put people in this position where they are being made to feel, and this is maybe me speaking on behalf of other people who don't feel this way. But when you say, I think the mayor needs to do this, I think Councilmember Palmer needs to do, I think you could have talked to Councilmember Palmer about that after this meeting. So just there are times where we have conversations where it just gets to a point of passive aggression and disrespect. And that was all I wanted to add on this part of it.
Thank you. We have one more speaker, and then we'll close off this one particular topic. I'm aware this is definitely a passionate issue, and I take the grace in that this is a council who really cares and is excited about what could be really bold, transformative changes to our city. So with that, I'm definitely appreciative of the first of many broader conversations here, and definitely appreciative of all the perspectives here. It's ultimately just going to result in a stronger document and just clear guidance for a city manager. So I'm really grateful for that. Councilmember Palmer, then we'll close out this topic and move on.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I guess I wanted to just point out that, you know, there's been a couple of emails sent out from OSAC, from Ben, yes, ahead of this. And, you know, since this was something that interested me, then I sent in recommendations on the first draft, and now these are my recommendations on this draft. And so I understand it's an ongoing conversation. If we want to talk about, you know, what should be in OSAC and what shouldn't, let's have that conversation. But I think like this has been something that, like Councilmember Walker had said, or Councilmember Scott had said, that has been there. And I have felt the need to chime in at different times. And yes, this is how you all are still learning how I work, but this is how I work. I go through and I see the things that, you know, call my attention, and I want to bring those up into your attention. And if there's another purpose of study session besides an opportunity for us all to get together to discuss these things, let me know. I feel like it's implied that there's a discussion that's going to happen, and this is the opportunity for us all to communicate. Because as we know, it's a big pull in order for us to do this, especially, you know, if we have a document that comes out in a week, for me to contact you each individually beforehand, when there's not a decision that's going to be made versus talking at a table where community can see it and where we have the opportunity to discuss back and forth. It makes the most sense to me on an efficiency level to do that.
Thank you. And City Manager, it looks like even though this conversation appeared to take on a life of its own, there is a second section related to policy goals. Out of an abundance of respect for our staff, I'd much rather prefer that you conclude with any final thoughts before we move on to next steps. And just to respect our staff's time and also the rest of the agenda, we will forego any future council comments on this topic before we move on. City Manager?
Sure.
Section 2.
Thank you, Mayor. The second topic, I'm going to just dwell, just to make this a productive conversation here, I'm going to dwell on the performance metric here. The second one, as far as council priorities, strategy, and status. This is not to say that these are the only areas upon which I would be using our staff resources and my talented colleagues to support you all, but to enhance perceptions of public safety for Tacoma residents, the city manager will work with police, fire, neighborhood community services, public works, environmental services, and all other departments to improve neighborhood conditions as measured by the business climate and community surveys. That is an ongoing effort that we make. Our community survey is launching this week. It's a way in which we can actually take a look at, are we capturing ways in which to do this? It's very broad. It is very much subjective at some points, but there is a point where we need to improve the conditions. And to your one employee, prospectively, it's me, you need to hold me accountable as well. And so both it's what I've heard here today, and just maybe this is a commentary, I really do appreciate this conversation, because what I'm hearing to make this more productive, Mayor, I'm hearing council members speak to the fact that they don't want to overly prescribe and box me into the conditions that are out of my control prospectively. But I'm also hearing, well, we also have to get some things on the board where we're talking to the community of what you're working on our behalf and how we're going to measure you. It's that balance. I think there is a way to do this in a way in which prospectively, maybe not in a study session, OSAC you can consider as committee members and as the chair, taking that to a committee of the whole to work on this as well. So I will dwell there, Mayor, unless you would like me to call out specifically any of these initiatives, but just hearing and reflecting on what you've heard while I'm taking this feedback.
We'll defer to your preference.
I will move on to the next one. For housing and homelessness, the performance metric, to support the well-being and dignity of our unhoused residents and ensure safety and cleanliness of the city for all Tacomans, the city manager will direct our NCS to reduce portions of Tacomans experiencing chronic homelessness by 2035. Ambitious goal. Any way in which we can actually make that measurable move, I think it's worthy, and taking steps this year to mitigate. There's some initiatives here as well. And then under jobs and economy, the performance metric, to ensure a vibrant business environment, the city manager will direct CED and all other departments to engage with community partners and industry to analyze, improve Tacoma's business climate, as evidenced by an increase in business satisfaction scores in the business climate survey that we produce every year or every other year. The next performance metric, to enhance the speed of permitting in Tacoma. This is somewhat of a continuation item. In collaboration with TPU, the city manager will direct planning development services, finance, and all other departments to reduce the time it takes to issue certain permits by the end of 2027. Open for business. That is this metric.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Any closing thoughts or just feedback on timeline and next steps?
Mayor Ibsen, I think the next, there is a planned another OSAC meeting, but with the feedback that I've received on your behalf, perhaps the council would want to consider having a committee of the whole conversation where you can have a little more discussions as to your work plan for me. It is both, and my work plan to you as far as what I would like to deliver. So,
sure. Happy to schedule that.
Thank you for the vigorous conversation.
Of course. Thank you for your patience and grace. All right, moving on. Our third agenda item is the Media and Communications Quarterly Update. I'd like to call on Media and Communications Office Director Amy Clancy to begin the presentation.
Hello, everybody. Let me get all my stuff together. And you all know Golden. I should flush a little bit because you look, there we go. Wonderful. Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor and Council, thanks for having us. For those of you who have not been part of this before, I do this every quarter with Golden. We share facts and figures, we share data that we have compiled because we know that what we do digitally is something that we can track. So that is the purpose of our quarterly updates, to keep you in the loop. So first, I wanted to share some numbers. Since I got here in mid-April of 2023, for anybody who's questioning the impact of digital communications, here are some numbers from cityoftacoma.org and tacoma.gov. We've had 11 million page views, 5.2 million unique users, which is basically 2 times the size of Puget Sound area, and a 38 million event count. That's how many times people have clicked on something, looked at a page, watched a video, looked at an application. And so people are really engaging with the City of Tacoma digitally, and that's a really important way for people to find us. And I just want you to know that it's something that we take seriously, because we know that this is a great way to reach not only people in Tacoma, but people across the world. We are the City of Tacoma, and this is how we share. I also want you to know that we hear you. I've heard the phrase effective communications multiple times, especially in the past quarter, which is great. And if I'm hearing you correctly, what I'm hearing is that you believe effective communications include good storytelling, transparency, accountability. One of you also mentioned that we need to know what our why is when we communicate with the public. And I just want to share with you my why. I believe transparency and accountability will equal belief and trust. And this is something that I believe from my years in journalism. I spent over 30 years sharing facts, information. The picture on the left I just wanted to share because that's the result of a 4-month investigation into an elected city official who was misusing public funds. I understand how the public sees people in power and understand their desire for them to be transparent and accountable. The middle picture was when I was invited to go attend something called Journalism Law School. I was the only local television reporter in the country invited to attend. I was nominated by a lawyer. And I was there with people from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, ABC, CBS, and it was a seminar down at Loyola Law School where we learned how to use public disclosure requests and FOIAs to get information from people like you all, people who serve the public. And it was just a very enlightening time. So you might be wondering, how does somebody go from this to what I'm doing now? Well, that's a good question. Tacoma resident or Tacoma native Chief Carmen Best hired me to increase transparency at the Seattle Police Department. And that's how I made the transition from journalist to communications director. But I also want you to know that I was really lucky when this job opened up, that when I walked in here, they gave me an 81-page document. That is my strategic plan. It's my work plan. It includes all of the things that Jay Ray did surveys on, spoke to employees about, and it came out in 2022 before I started here, which clearly identified where we could do better. And it's 81 pages, so there's a lot in there. But I do want to point out, for example, one of the first things was hire a digital manager. And that person is Golden Doles. We didn't have somebody who was identified to manage all of our digital content. Also talked about a large-scale overhaul of the website, which we've done. A singular PIO to own PIO duties, which we have also done. It also indicated that the survey believed that TV Tacoma was underutilized. We needed to be sharing that video content more than just on television, which is why we now have the digital-first strategy. Also talked about restructuring MCO to be 100% dedicated to communications. And these quotes are coming directly from the audit. So dedicated to communications, not community engagement, not strategy. Those are 2 functions that are now outside of MCO. It also talked about incorporating city branding. And you've heard me talk about that, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. But more audit recommendations included, we recommend the team adopt an intake form that requires the prioritization of the work being asked of the team and ensures the most efficient use of their time and resources. That's why we took on a software called Reich, because it takes the information that the departments want MCO to share, and it puts it in all one intake form so we can clarify what are your needs and how can we deliver them. It also said we further recommend the adoption of processes that allow MCO to be more of an advisor to other departments rather than needing to take on communication for every project and initiative. This has resulted in things like talking points when you're doing a media interview. We also did not have FAQs that we shared on our website before I got here, and the City of Tacoma does a lot of complex projects. You know, dozens, if not hundreds of pages of information for a single project, but how can you take that information and condense it into something that the public can easily understand? I'm not saying the public can't understand complex things, they definitely can. But it's nice to have 5 to 10 FAQs that clearly identify what is this project, how did it start, how does it work, where is it going? So this audit is my strategy, my communications plan. And speaking of logo, as we've talked about, we've been talking about for a long time, according to the audit, the City of Tacoma branding lacks a consistent look and feel, and that MCO needs to incorporate city branding. So it's not just Amy Clancy saying this at MCO. It's the reason why we're going from dozens and dozens of different logos and colors to as close to this as we can possibly get. It doesn't apply to fire, doesn't apply to police, doesn't apply to TPU. But for general government, we're trying to get as close to this per audit recommendations to get a more consistent look and feel. So I do this every quarter. I talk about what's new, and this is what's new in just the first quarter of 2026. We've updated our crisis communications plan. We know we've got a big event happening here in June and July with the World Cup. We needed to make sure that our crisis communications plan was up to date with the right numbers so people know how to get in touch with each other. We also, in partnership with one of our departments, created a service level agreement. It hadn't been clarified, what does MCO offer? What does MCO not offer? So we created an SLA in partnership with PDS, and that's something that really clarifies what we can do for you. Podcasts, we've broken ground. We were just uploaded to Apple today. We're getting there. We haven't put any new content on, but we're making progress. We're also, as you know, launching a streets video project for 5 weeks, and that's, I think we're going to be loading episode 3 tomorrow. And speaking of storytelling, I also wanted to share information about our Tacoma Fire Department Public Information Officer, Chelsea Shepard. When I first got here, fire did not have a PIO. And it was something that then Chief Green talked to me about. How can we get more information about the Tacoma Fire Department out? Well, the audit says have a PIO. And so he and I worked together, and it's paid for by fire, but Chelsea works in the MCO office. And just to give you an idea of what kind of impact a single employee can have, these figures are just from the year 2025. She started halfway through 2024. So in 2025 alone, she's had 2.4 million social media views, 43,000 total engagement, 6,400 new followers, and her Facebook video watch time is up 309%. It has direct community impact because their CPR class enrollment increased by 18%. She's published over 460 posts, which is a 79% increase over 2024. Media availability and media visibility. Because Chelsea is there and can answer media questions, TFD incidents and events were mentioned 450 times in the fourth quarter of 2025 alone, reaching an audience of 16.8 million. 74% of that was local broadcast coverage. So reporters know Chelsea is there, she'll pick up the phone, she'll meet me at the scene, she'll do an interview, she'll give me the facts, and it's really increased Tacoma Fire Department's visibility. And when it comes to weekly social topics, she likes to have fun with it too. She has station spotlights. On Tuesdays, it's health and safety tips and preparedness. And then on Throwback Thursdays, she includes old video from the archives. They're a lot of fun, a lot of firefighters from the 70s, and a lot of the engagement is from retired firefighters really enjoying seeing what they looked like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever. So she's definitely having an impact, and it's really fun to see. So what have we seen as far as social stats in the past 3 years? Since 2023, we've had a 24% increase in Facebook. We've had a 70% increase on Instagram, and our YouTube numbers have increased 31%. In the year of 2025 alone, our Instagram impressions were up to 1.6 million, which is up 494% from the year prior. Our Facebook impressions from 2025 were at 5.8 million, which is up 691% from the year prior. So we regularly use this data to help us understand what is effective, what's reaching people, and how many people are we reaching. And then I come to you every quarter, and I'm accountable to you, because if those numbers go down, I'll definitely tell you that as well. But when something doesn't get engagement, we try to pivot. We try to go in a different direction. If something does, then we know, okay, this is something that people really like to see. Moving on to Tacoma.gov. As you know, we launched our new website on April 30th, and since then, so not even a full year later, we've had more than 3 million total page views with more than 1 million unique users. City of Tacoma has a population of 220,000. So 5 times basically the city of Tacoma is engaging with our website. And we've had a 14.5 million event count. Again, that's how many times somebody has clicked on something, watched a video, filled out a form. This is also something we're constantly evaluating. We're also constantly evaluating how effective the pages are, how they can be clarified, how information can be culled or added so that it's more helpful. Okay, so here's some more information from just Q1. We've had nearly 1 million total page views. This is since the beginning of the year, with 295,000 unique users, a 5.3 million event count, and approximately 400 updates and edits made to those web pages by Golden and her team. Her team's not huge. Manny Brown is in the back. There he is, waving. Manny and the web stewards, it's not a big team, but in just 1 quarter, they were able to make 400 updates. And one of those updates, I have to say, I really love is our hero image on our webpage. If you haven't noticed it, it's the video at the top that takes up the top of the third of the screen. Brian Cox, our multimedia guy, last week, the cherry blossoms were beautiful. He just went out to Wapato and took some new video with the cherry blossoms, trying to get out in as many neighborhoods as possible and show the beauty that is Tacoma, because we do have a beautiful city and we want to show it off. So getting to the social numbers, and I'll whip through these as fast as I can because I know we've got more on the agenda. In just Q1, our content was viewed 1.3 million times, which was a 17% increase over Q1 of 2025. We have more than 31,000 followers, so we've gained 964 since last quarter, with 23,000 reactions, comments, shares, saves, replies, etc. More than 1,200 link clicks, so when they see our posts, they go someplace else, and we had 176 posts. Of those posts, the top ones were, number 1, Eudora's Bakery Cafe, which was one of our Black History Month features. It had more than 1,900 likes and loves. Number 2 was Patty Jackson confirmed as chief with 1,400 likes and loves. And the third was the 12th man flag over the Tacoma Dome with just over 1,000 likes and loves. We also include video, not only on our Facebook and our Instagram, we have Reels, but we also include video on our website. These were the top 3 Facebook videos for Q1. The first one was the 12th man flag with 1,100 likes and loves. Number 2 and number 3 were both Tacoma report stories. And this is an example of that underutilization before of TV Tacoma. We've got great people taking great video. They do wonderful work, but there's no sense in just sharing it in only one place, which is television. So we share it also on our social. And those were the second and third most viewed Facebook videos. Number 2 was the Tacoma Report story with Parks Tacoma on Monkey Shines with 296 likes and loves. And number 3, Black History Month celebration at the People's Community Center with 96. Moving on to Instagram. Q1 content was viewed 319,000 times, which was a 48% increase over Q1 in 2025. We have over 17,000 followers, which was a 7% increase over Q4. 12,000 likes, comments, shares, etc., and 144 posts, which is more than a post a day. So we are sharing content. And of the most popular, I love to share this because the number 1 photo of the week was a snowman at Wright Park. You can probably guess when that was taken. That was March 13th. And this is an example of Tara Long, our social media person, recognizing we've got an opportunity here, she was out walking her dogs, she just took a picture, and it happened to be the #1 photo of the week. 810 likes. It doesn't have to be produced, it doesn't have to be staged or planned, but immediate and recognizable and fun is really important, and Tara is really good at that. The #2 photo of the week was from Mount Rainier from Point Ruston, which is a beautiful shot, and the #3 was the 12th man Go Hawks flag over the Tacoma Dome. Top 3 videos of the quarter, again, the 12th man flag over the Tacoma Dome. The #2 was a snow day reel that Tara shot on March 13th with 444 likes. And #3 was a Tacoma Report story, again, a TV Tacoma product that we share on social as well. The Parks Tacoma MLK Day of Service with 172 likes. Moving on to social media trends, and we like to share these just so you know that we are trying to be on trend as much as possible. Like all across the country, X followers are down. We still have 56,000 followers on X. So when there is a road closure or a tree down or some reason for us to reach out to people quickly, we still use X and say, this has happened. We think it's a great way to engage with people. Even though there are fewer people on it than there used to be, there are still 56,000 people who follow us on X. Next door, we have 75,000 members in the city of Tacoma, and we target our posts to demographics or council districts. We've had 6 posts in the first quarter. They're always hyper-local. This is happening here, so we can send it just directly to that area. And we had over 5,300 impressions. And on YouTube, we have nearly 6,000 subscribers, which is an increase of 700 in the past year. We've had over 37,000 content views, and we've uploaded 115 videos. Moving on to the Hub. The Hub is an internal SharePoint site where people who are City of Tacoma employees can get information. We don't share as many all-city emails as we used to. We want to encourage people to go to the Hub for information. In this first quarter alone, there were more than 75,000 page views by 3,300 unique users, which is good because we have almost 4,000 employees. We had 38 total news posts added. The top visited site was the homepage, followed by human resources, and then followed by that was the link on global navigation and job openings, as you can imagine. And Manny works hard on keeping the Tacoma Hub up to date. The top 3 posts were the Kudos campaign, #1, Engineers Week was #2, and #3 was the 2026 Employee Appreciation Breakfast. Moving on to the Public Information Officer. As you know, Maria Lee works really hard. Analyzing the volume and pace of the PIO's media relations workload reveals not only consistently high demand, but an escalating trend. From January 1, 2026 to March 26, 2026, she managed 186 media inquiries, which is compared to 155 from that same time last year. That is a 20% increase, and it points to a heightened media cycle and growing public interest in the city's operations and strategic direction. The thematic focus is right here also listed. The nature of the inquiries from the media underscores that journalists are focused on highly sensitive core community challenges spanning public safety, housing, essential services, and civic leadership. The 5 most frequent topics so far this year, shifting focus from last year's top topics of homelessness and shelter funding, include #1, immigration enforcement, #2, expansion of garbage can program, followed by questions about Mayor Anders Ibsen, then homelessness, and police chief and city manager recruitments. So the information strongly suggests that the PIO's media relations workload continues to be characterized by deeply complex and sensitive issues rather than simple transactional questions. She continues to unpack intricate subjects with journalists to ensure their accurate understanding. For example, recent questions required her to carefully explain the fiduciary responsibilities and the mechanics of passive index funds as they relate to the Tacoma Employees Retirement System and its minimal fractional exposure to controversial holdings. Clarifying data reporting metrics on the HEAL dashboard, guiding reporters through the administrative review processes to explain closure rates on homelessness-related service requests, and outlining the implications and timelines of the new 0.1% criminal justice and public safety sales tax. It's a good thing for us that Maria Lee is a very smart person, because she has to explain complex topics to people, and she relies on the subject matter experts. She reaches out, she calls them, she has long conversations with them, so she understands and can easily explain it to people. So, moving on to TV Tacoma. We're making, TV Tacoma, like I said, creates great content, but they also go out into the community and they bring events that you folks are all involved in to the public. For example, this quarter alone, the City Manager Community Event, then the Martin Luther King Jr. celebration, and the Mayor's first State of the City. Tacoma Report, I brought you the Monkey Shine story. There was also a great story about the Red Cedars new trail at Point Defiance. We also have on City Line topical, informational, enjoyable, entertaining interviews. The first one here is from the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration, followed by the new paved trail in Point Defiance, followed by Little Miss Sweets, who is a 2026 City of Destiny Award winner. The first quarter alone included interviews with 23 different nonprofits, 7 different City of Tacoma departments, 6 City of Tacoma businesses, 14 different theaters and concerts, and other government agencies that were represented included the IRS, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, scams and how to avoid them, Social Security, that type of thing. So lots of great informational content, and many of you have made guest appearances as well. Moving on to email marketing and gov delivery for quarter one. We sent out 103 e-newsletters, e-blasts, and notifications, which were delivered to 553,000 recipients. Total number of subscriptions is 322,000, which is an increase of 21,000 just since quarter four. The total number of subscribers is 134,000, which is an increase of 3,200 since quarter four. And just so you know, your council staff have access to this data and this information, so you can see how it's, how you're trending or whatever. Now, I mentioned earlier that according to the audit, MCO should just be focused on communications, and we are. Community engagement is embedded in departments, but we support the department's community engagement efforts through these ways. Leah and Dee work with the departments to create flyers and marketing materials and social media materials and things that the community engagement folks can bring to the community, either in person or on digital platforms. So we like to make sure that our materials have the City of Tacoma colors and branding guidelines. We like people to understand what it is the City of Tacoma does. So even though we are not the ones out there doing the community engagement, we do support departments' community engagement efforts. So what's ahead in quarter two and beyond? And I'm almost done. Of course, we're working on our budget, just like everybody else. As I mentioned, our podcast studio build is underway. It's noisy up there, but you're welcome to come up and take a look at any time. We utilize AI when we can because we do not have a large staff, as you've heard me mention. We basically have one person doing every job. And we have 2 people who represent 20 departments. And so we need to make sure that we're using our time as wisely as possible. We wouldn't put something out that hadn't been fact-checked or made sure it was City of Tacoma branding appropriate, but we do use it to help us do our jobs more efficiently. Something else that we're working on is we're continuing to use as many platforms for our storytelling as possible. And I just want to let you know about something that we're currently working on. Our team did a HEAL Team ride-along. It's going to be part of our Tacoma in Action video series. Tacoma in Action basically tells the story of what the City of Tacoma employees are doing for the people of Tacoma. And this particular video will tell the story not from the employee standpoint, but from the people who have been recipients of help from the HEAL Team. We hear a lot about what people say people enjoy about it, but we wanted to hear from the people who were personally impacted themselves. So this video will tell the story of Larry, the guy up in the upper left, who got into shelter after a HEAL Team member physically carried him to where he needed to go. Bottom left-hand corner, that's a couple named Lucky and Bandit. They've remained sober, they got into shelter, they retained custody of their daughter, and they're moving into permanent housing after working consistently for 2 years with the HEAL team. Steve, the guy in the white hat, is a service provider who worked with HEAL team to reduce violence in the communities where he serves food. And Chris, who is in the red shirt with the black hood, he worked with HEAL to regain his sobriety and the custody of his daughter. He is now stably housed and with a support network building a bright future for his family. And when asked about HEAL, he said, they gave me a place to stay, a place to put my daughter, to get her back in my life. You guys did a wonderful job with that. And one of the things that I thought was interesting about a lot of these interviews is most of them started by saying, I couldn't stand you. I didn't know you. I didn't trust you. But these are all people who might have had that feeling at the beginning, but after being contacted multiple times, earning their trust, they were able to get into housing and get some help thanks to the HEAL team. So that's going to be coming along in Q2. And with that, happy to take questions.
Thank you, Anna. Very thorough presentation. Any questions? Councilmember Walker.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you, not only for this presentation, seeing these numbers across all the platforms is really powerful, I think both for us and for the community that's listening, but also for the continued content. And Golden, thank you for sending that email every week to let us know what's coming. That's super helpful. I don't check it every week, but when I do, then I'm able to share things on my platforms too. Only really quick question is on the email marketing gov delivery. You might have said this, but does that include our newsletters
Yes.
too? Okay,
Yeah.
just wanted to check on that.
Yeah,
That's
and
great.
department, different newsletters too, but yeah, definitely your newsletters.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much for the presentation. Oh, Councilmember Palmer, jump the gun.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Takes me a minute to get my thoughts together.
You're good.
I just wanted to thank you for for including all of the numbers that we can kind of compare where we were at and where we're at now. That's super helpful. Do you know, and maybe this is something to do next time, is to look at maybe similar cities, like same size, and kind of how we compare to the traffic they're maybe seeing or what they're doing?
Yeah, I did look at some of those numbers just earlier today. For example, even the city of Seattle, they only have about 20,000 followers on their Facebook page. Looking here locally, Pierce County has about 25,000. And then I looked at Spokane because that is a very kind of similar sized city as city of Tacoma, and they had about 29,000. So on our platform, we have 31,000 on Facebook. So it is a little bit higher than some of the other local ones in other cities. So wanted to really share that. We have a little more followers than they do.
And hopefully growing.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. We look forward to the further conversation as part of the budget.
Thank you.
All right. Our fourth agenda item is our 2026 Annual Action Plan for Housing and Community Development. I'd like to call on Community and Economic Development Housing Division Manager Felicia Medlin to begin the presentation.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. I am going to be before you briefly today. So every year we have to go through this process. It's for our annual action plan. It's related to 3 federal grant programs that we receive funding for. I'll talk about those on the next slide. And so the very beginning part of this process starts with the consolidated plan. Right now, we're in the 2025 to 2029 5-year consolidated planning cycle. And so our consolidated plan consists of 4 parts: a needs assessment, a market analysis, a strategic plan, and then it includes a 1-year spending plan for the first year. So we're currently in year 2 of our 5-year plan. Okay, a little delay. So our annual component, our program year runs from July 1 to June 30th of each year. And so these are our estimated 2026 funding allocations that are pending budget allocation and approval currently. So they're based on our 2025 actuals. So for the Community Development Block Grant or CDBG program, we received $2.3 million. For Emergency Solutions Grant, we have just over $207,000. And then for the Home Investment Partnerships Program, we're at $1,070,000. So these programs are all designed to serve individuals with a maximum income of 80%, and a lot of our programs target 0 to 30 for the ESG program, and then CDBG is anywhere from 65 to 80%, so 80% is a hard cap as a maximum. So we implement these programs through a few types of agreements. So we have subrecipient agreements between the City of Tacoma and the Tacoma Community Redevelopment Authority and the City of Lakewood. And then we also have individual contracts with providers out in the community to provide direct services. So I'm just going to run through the grant allocation and breakdowns for each of the grants now, and then we'll have time for any questions or comments on the presentation. So for CDBG, that $2.3 million, the 20% for admin and the 15% per public services are regulatory set-asides. The 13% and 52% set aside for housing programs and economic development are made at the department level in terms of how those funds are distributed across those two activities. And so within the housing programs and economic development programs, we have 4 activities that we'll be undertaking. On the housing side, they're all going to be related to single-family rehab. So this is our an anti-displacement program that helps keep homeowners in their homes. And then we have 2 providers, so the Tacoma Pierce County Chamber Spaceworks program and Business Impact Northwest, that are going to be doing technical assistance for microenterprise businesses. And so those activities will total $1.5 million in activity going towards that. And then with public services, this is CED works really closely with Neighborhood and Community Services, who is actually the implementing side of these funds, and they're going to be doing some shelter programming with these funds, which we see year over year, and their set aside is $355,000. So moving on to the ESG program, this is just a general breakdown. So the 7.5% is a regulatory maximum for admin, and then the HMIS, or Homeless Management Information System, operations is 2.5%, and then the balance of that goes to external contracts. And the external contracts for this program are going to be shelter programs once again, and then rapid rehousing. And then finally, the home program. This one is pretty cut and dry, so we have Lakewood as a consortium member for us, so we divide the money with them. They currently have a 20% population contribution to the formula, and so we transfer that percentage to the overall grant allocation that we have. And so they have about $712,000 that they use to implement programs. Oh, no, that's ours. They have $250,000, my apologies, that they use to implement programs in the City of Lakewood. We set aside $107,000 for administration, which is a 10% regulatory maximum. And then we have $712,000 that we make available for mainly the new construction activity on the homeownership side and the rental side. We try to prioritize homeownership, since home is one of the primary sources we have for homeownership funding. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So starting tomorrow, we will be having a 30-day comment period on the draft document. And then on April 21st, we are planning for a public hearing. And I believe at tonight's council, there'll be a resolution read to set that date for the public hearing. We will be coming before you on May 5th for final action, and then we have a submission deadline to submit the plan to HUD on May 15th, and that does conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Medlin. We have a couple of questions, first from Councilmember Rumbaugh, followed by Councilmember Sadalge.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to thank you so much, Felicia, because I've already heard your report at Community Vitality and Safety. And I want to thank you so much for how you laid out the funding. This is really easy to understand. Can I just ask one question about when we do the HMIS operations, the grant allocations, do we give, I know the county does, they give out like different, I don't know how to, certificates or user things. Does that go to other providers, or is it just for the city?
And I have Caleb coming up to answer that question.
Thank you, Councilmember Rumbaugh. That funding goes to help with the training of our staff, to help with navigating that system disproportionately. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining that. Appreciate that. And I just could, for everyone here and for anyone who's listening, could you just describe how funding happens? Like, so you send a grant into the federal government and then we have to wait to see if we're going to get the funds? Is that how it works?
So for these funds, these are formula allocations, and so it's based on population. So we're automatically in HUD's queue, so to speak, to be given a set aside for these funds pending the passage of a budget. So as long as they pass a budget that includes funding for the home CDBG and ESG programs, there will be a formula applied to that will give us our portion each year.
And so we're hoping that the budget gets done so that we get our money in time this year.
Yes, so the, I believe it was the continuing resolution that they passed about 37 days ago. So that started HUD's clock. HUD has 60 days to issue our actual allocation number. So they're running that formula currently. And I believe on next week, I actually think April 7th, is the date that they're supposed to have that process complete by.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Sadalge.
Thank you. So everything you're presenting here, this is all federal HUD dollars, or is there any state kind of match or anything like that included in here? Just so I kind of understand the landscape.
Yes, these are only federal dollars. They don't include any required match contributions that the city has to provide.
Got it. The city or state or both, or just the city?
The city, and
Okay.
just for awareness, the match dollars that do support these funds are our local affordable housing fund dollars. So we kind of have an inherent
Is it our
source
1/10
for
of
match.
1%?
Yes.
Okay, that was going to be my last question, is how does the 1/10 of 1% kind of interact? Okay, and I also want to be cognizant that this is one slice of many different funding sources that we use to do all sorts of housing things across our city, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, because I don't want people to think that we only have these sources. We're going through this specifically because it's a requirement that we do our plan with HUD to be able to even receive some of this funding.
Yeah.
I really did appreciate, because one of the questions I had was like examples of what some of these plans do. So I got the CDBG. Came from a city that had CBGBs, so yeah, no. Home allocation, that was kind of a new one for me. What are some of the kind of programs or activities we do with some of the home dollars?
Yeah, so currently, I would say in the past 3 years, it's been primarily used for new construction. So we've had projects awarded that were multifamily rental, and we've also had some home ownership development projects. So those are the two main categories. Historically, we have also used it for down payment assistance. And so that's usually if a new construction home ownership activity is coming into play, they usually also request some down payment assistance funding to help support the sale of those units.
I kind of recall this program in which you have to create new housing that's at like 95% of the median, like new housing. They have like a dollar number they tell you, like this is the max,
Yes,
right?
very good, cool that you latched onto that 95%. So that is a sale price restriction.
Yeah.
So it's 95% of median is what they cap the sale price for units that were developed under this project.
And median being what, basically half the homes are selling for more or less, so this is an achievable number for most middle class or slightly lower than median income. Great. I did also want to point out, because we had this as a talking point when we were in NLC, we were pushing a bipartisan effort at the federal level called the Road to Housing Act that we're hoping will pass, that does some things to some of this funding that should help. So I'm looking forward to how we can expand this one source of funding. Thank you.
Thank you. I would very much appreciate the presentation and looking forward to continuing this work later throughout the year. All right, moving on, we have a council committee request from Councilmember Scott.
I'm working on this one with Councilmember Scott, and can we just swap these items so that she's here for it?
Yeah, sounds like a plan. Okay. With that, our next item is from Councilmember Walker pertaining to Sound Transit.
Great, thank you. I am also ready for that.
Okay.
So as you all have seen, we sent out a media release yesterday about this. The goal here is really to just give a recap of the Sound Transit Board retreat that happened here in Tacoma a couple weeks ago. Many of you reached out to me after that because there was a lot of media about it and a lot of confusion about what was actually decided at that event. And so I wanted to just briefly go over what we did at that event, talk about our priorities as the Pierce delegation on the Sound Transit Board, and then open it up for comments from you all, because I know that you have been fielding conversations from constituents. I also want to acknowledge my board colleague is here, Councilmember Hunter George from Furcrest, and you're welcome to come up here and join the conversation if you'd like. So just really briefly on the board retreat, this was March 18th, happened here in Tacoma. We were discussing primarily what we're calling the Enterprise Initiative, which is closing an affordability gap of about $34 billion. And staff gave us 3 sort of scenarios that had multiple levers that we could pull on to address the gap. There are revenue options and there are cost-saving options. The intention of the presentations was not like pick one scenario. It was here are different ways we could do this, and we'll talk through what those might be. Then we also worked in small groups on what we call opportunity registers, which is basically just a list of solutions, and they were in different buckets from staff. Really incredibly important and valuable to dig into all of those pieces. And then what came out of that, as you all know, is a lot of conversation about like, well, whose project are we cutting? And I've been very clear, everyone I've talked to, that is not the intention of the board, is just to like slash each other's projects, but really to work together to creatively solve problems. And I've gotten that over and over again. We have an amazing Pierce delegation, including Councilmember Hunter George, our county executive, Ryan Mello, and Mayor Kim Roscoe from Fife. 4 of us are working together on all things Pierce County. But I would share this also for all my other board colleagues on the Sound Transit Board, that everybody wants to get everything done. There is no intention here to cut anything. And we realize we're faced with an affordability gap that we have to solve. But we do want to deliver the transit that we promised the voters all across the system. It's a regional system. That being said, Pierce County has waited a long time for our regional light rail connections, and so we're going to push pretty hard to make sure that Sound Transit fulfills that commitment. As has been mentioned also earlier today, with our planning team, we have done a lot of work to prepare for light rail in Tacoma, upzoning, land use planning, specifically around the future stations, specifically preparing for high-capacity investments, both along the Tacoma Dome Link extension, but also our TCC project, which is the expansion of the T-line. So want to just very briefly, and then I'll let you, Board Member George, say a few words before we open it up. But we have 3 sort of big projects here in Tacoma. You all know about the Tacoma Dome Link extension. Our goal is to get the Tacoma Dome Link extension to the Tacoma Dome. That is a priority. And this is what really delivers us into the larger system, makes the connection into the regional network. And this is also one that we've delayed in the past. And so we feel like we've put in our delay time, and we need to deliver that to the people of Tacoma and Pierce County. The second sort of bucket of work is the Tacoma Community College extension of the T-line. And this is a project that's very early in the planning stages, so we don't have a lot of information on the costs. We have sort of this very big estimate number. but really, really important in helping folks get around within Tacoma and Pierce County. And again, I'll let Councilmember George talk a little bit more about that. But serves Tacoma Community College and all those students, serves Cheney Stadium and the Rainiers, and then tons and tons of TOD development potential along that. And then the third one is our Sounder commuter rail. So obviously we have a robust Sounder commuter rail. One of the things that's in question is, and we have been working on for many years, is how to add more capacity there. And for a long time that was assumed to be longer trains and longer stations, which is incredibly expensive to build. What the riders have told us is, no, let's have more trips all day. So we're pushing that forward to get more trips all day throughout the Sounder system. And then also in ST3, there is an extension to DuPont, and that's another one that is very, very early in the planning process, and certainly want to keep that on the list, but thinking about creative ways to get that one done. It's a real opportunity because Sound Transit owns much of the tracks, so in a lot of ways it's an easier project to implement. So with that, I will kick it over to you, Board Member George, if you want to add a few things, and then ask my colleagues for questions and comments and path forward. Yeah, just, there you go.
I've never been at this table before.
Welcome.
I wasn't sure which button to push. Thank you, Councilmember Walker. And just, I don't want to be the thing keeping you from adjournment today, so I'll be super brief, which is to say that the four of us represent the entire Sound Transit District within Pierce County. And so we think about all of those projects and all those places. I want to speak to, coming from my area of the county there with Fircrest and UP, we have the Four Corners initiative that we've been working on for many years, where at the intersection of 19th Street and Mildred, you have Tacoma, UP, Fircrest, and then the 12,000 student community college. That is a significant, it's a major intersection, and you've got 3 jurisdictions and a college campus all there. We've called it the Four Corners Planning Initiative. It's been going on since before COVID. Where we've been trying to make sure that we don't have 3 different sets of comprehensive plans and 3 different visions of what that area will look like. We've been planning for this extension for many, many years, and so we're hoping to maintain that. And I think as Councilmember Walker said, the Sound Transit hasn't begun the planning on that yet, so it's really kind of a back of napkin almost. I'm sure it's an educated guess, but that's all it is because no engineering has been done. So hoping to at least see that project advance so that we can figure out where are the savings potentials. And then actually wearing the other hat, you mentioned Cheney Stadium. The Parks Tacoma is envisioning working with the city and the school district on a new master plan for that Heidelberg-Cheney campus that has a ton of potential for entertainment, for economic development, and for recreation. And we're planning on having a light rail stop there. So it's an important part of that plan. So I'm doing the same thing that you're doing, where I'm trying to spark some conversations with the Fircrest Council and the UP Council in the next week or so. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. We have 2 additional other items of interest. Councilmember Scott has a CC to bring forward, and then we have a letter from the Deputy Mayor. Oh, did you? Oh, is in moving in the other direction?
Which one do you want to do first?
If you're pressed for time, then Deputy Mayor.
Well, yeah, I think just timely conversation. It's
course.
probably good to bring the letter up. So just want to, given the conversation that we've been hearing from the Sound Transit Board, and really appreciate the representation you guys bring to Pierce County and Tacoma on that board, I felt compelled that it's important to really reiterate and restate the priorities of our city as well as our delegation. And I really appreciate Councilmember Walker and Scott for their input on helping kind of get this together. And normally we'd like to get this on prior, but these conversations are timely, and so it's something I would like us to be able to vote on tonight during council. And obviously open to additional changes to the letter as well, if any folks have suggestions before it gets before us tonight. But basically, it reiterates a lot of the things that Councilmember Walker just brought up, recognizing that they are in a pretty large funding gap. but that there are nearly 1 million people in Pierce County that are relying or looking forward to relying on this essential service to our community. And we have already made significant public and private investments all across the city in anticipation of TDLE, as well as a lot of the zoning changes across our city, especially with the T-Link and things of that nature. And so just wanted to make sure that we're recognizing that we're also working very hand in hand with our Puyallup tribal partners, especially considering the stop on Portland Avenue and how important that is to them. And so I just wanted to make sure that we're reiterating this, given a lot of the conversation that's been happening. So that way, folks, as they're making decisions on these budgets, that they know that the city of Tacoma, Pierce County, and our region is really looking forward to the completion of ST3 projects here locally. So open to any topics or conversation on that.
Thank you. Thank you for letting Deputy Mayor Bushnell go, because this was an important point I want to bring up to two board members for Sound Transit. I think, Deputy Mayor made some compelling reasons why this is important, but there's another really important reason, especially in my district, right? There is an equity component to this. And the way I explain it is 98404, which is most of the east side, has some of the highest usage of public transportation, and it is poised to use more because it has one of the highest needs to use HOV lanes to get to work. It's one of the questions you have on the census. This is an area that has nearly 25% of the people speak a language other than English. It has a high population of BIPOC individuals. It has one of the lowest rates of people saying that they have the option to work remotely. So these are people who right now need to take HOV cars, right? They have to take cars, they have to carpool. They don't have an option to work remotely. And as one of the highest percentage of people that need to leave their city to get to work. We can all know where they're going, or a large portion. This is one of the highest, this is a population for whom a light rail coming down to the dome is absolutely going to be essential. On top of that, we have one of the only, I believe it might be the only elementary school right next to a highway, Jenny Reed. Every car that does not go on there, which we've already seen north of here, is a benefit to every child that is in that school. And we're about to have 3 high schools with a nexus to the dome. Not just the robotics center at LeMay. We're going to have the Maritime Center open, and we're going to have Idea High School coming in. And lastly, there's a tribe that has tried to exist that has 2 really important businesses that are going to be supported. So you don't have to put this in the letter, but I think it is the height of repeating historical systemic racism to prioritize areas where 60% of the married couples in Ballard earn more than $200,000 a year, that have some of the lowest rates of needing to use HOV to get to work, that already have buses that can get them for the 6% that use it, over indigenous people and people who've been historically shunned.
Deputy Mayor?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Councilmember Bushnell for putting together this letter, particularly for emphasizing this piece about the Puyallup tribe. I think it's pretty egregious that the non-Pierce County and I think Snohomish County folks on the Sound Transit Board would even consider putting anything before this piece of the line that would bring folks to the Puyallup tribe, to Tacoma, because it is such an important commuter area and because it is, to Councilmember Hidalgo's point on the data, it's really egregious to put some of the most affluent areas within a city, which being Ballard and West Seattle, above Tacoma. And quite frankly, Tacoma and Pierce County have been historically very, very skeptical of Sound Transit because of past actions. And this is the most important way that they can build on the promises that they have given us and not further erode that trust, because if there's hope for an ST4, we have to be at that table and we have to have this link completed. Otherwise, we're definitely never voting for this again. So I think now is the time. It's really critical. We've waited more than we should have. Some of these other stops should have never finished before Tacoma did, and now it's their time to finish the work for us. So thank you to our board members for fighting for us here in Tacoma. I appreciate you, and please let us know how else we can help.
Thank you, Councilmember Diaz. And any final comments?
I know that we're going to be bringing this forward on the consent agenda, but I do want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to maybe talk about this letter on the dais as well. I think it would be a good opportunity for us to do that.
Noted.
So maybe just before we adopt the consent agenda, we have an opportunity for council to weigh in on the letter specifically.
Of course, Councilmember Walker.
Thank you, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for that. I think that will be great. I just wanted to make a really quick note about timelines as folks who are listening and for my colleagues want to weigh in on how we move forward on this. Again, decisions have not been made. We have many proposals in front of us as a Sound Transit Board. The next month will be crucial in making decisions, looking at details. Staff has done an amazing job of bringing things forward for us to consider. But if folks want to speak up for light rail, now is the time. And our goal is to get some, if not a huge portion of the decisions made in the first half of this year as a board.
Thank you, and thank you both for your leadership, certainly in support. Anything we can do goes without saying. All right, thank you. And with that, we have a council committee request in front of us from Councilmember Scott and Councilmember Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm excited to share this proposed resolution with you all and grateful for Councilmember Walker as well as Councilmember Diaz's partnership in bringing this forward. Tacoma, like many other cities, has used large rocks or boulders as a last resort for site reclamation in some locations around the city. Specifically, in the past 2 years, we have placed boulders at 24 different sites. While boulders can provide some benefits, particularly for safety in dangerous or hazardous areas or protection around vital public infrastructure, our community members find them unappealing. We also hear from the community members that boulders can give a false impression that a neighborhood is unsafe or not well cared for by neighbors. Councilmember Walker and I have also noticed that some of the boulders around our city have been in those locations for a long time and appear to no longer be serving any specific purpose. Fortunately, there are a wide range of options to help make public and private spaces safer and more welcoming for people who live or work in the area while also discouraging criminal activity and loitering. We're particularly excited to see if we can increase our use of trees in site reclamation work. Trees are not always going to be the best choice for site reclamation, but can often work well in tandem with other techniques, including a temporary placement. Emphasis on the temporary placement of boulders. Plus, planting additional trees aligns well with our climate action plan and the urban forest priority action plan. In addition, enhancing the perception of safety in our community by removing unnecessary boulders and decreasing our reliance on the boulders in the future would help advance the community safety action strategy and many of our goals in the comprehensive plan. I will turn to Councilmember Walker to speak about the details of the way forward that we are proposing in our resolution.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Scott. This resolution affirms that site reclamation should aim to activate and restore public spaces for community use to the best extent possible. Specifically, the resolution notes that using trees and landscaping in site reclamation is a cost-effective way, or in a cost-effective way, should be a priority. It also affirms that the installation of boulders should continue to be a treatment of last resort only. Councilmember Scott mentioned the 24 site reclamation, or the sites that have boulders, and so the resolution directs the city manager to review all of those and then evaluate whether those boulders are still needed or necessary. If there are locations where boulders are no longer needed, the resolution directs the city manager to provide cost estimates for the removal of the boulders, site restoration, and boulder storage. And we want to bring these forward as part of the 27-28 biennial budget. So once we have those estimates, then we would bring those forward. This process, the whole process, will give us an opportunity to better understand the costs of restoring the sites. This is simply removing the boulders. It's also about putting grass back in, planting trees, other landscaping, and then we'll have that data as we head into budget decisions. This also notes that any boulders used in future for site reclamation in residential areas or locations that are highly visible to the public should be evaluated annually so that we don't just leave them in perpetuity. Lastly, we want to see some estimated costs and options for alternative treatments that decrease boulder use at future site reclamation locations included in the budget discussion, along with those estimated costs and options. We also want to share that information with private property owners just so that they know what their options are before they just automatically put down boulders. So we plan to bring this resolution forward at our next meeting, April 14th, so in 2 weeks. Happy to answer any questions, and I just want to really quickly shout out Christina Kahn for working with us on this. We spent many more months, I think, than we thought, just digging into information and work with a lot of different staff, but thank you to Christina for getting us here.
Thank you so much for your presentation. As a co-sponsor, Councilmember Diaz, do you have anything that you'd like to comment on this?
No, just thank you for your both, for all your work on this. I've also shared a lot of your concerns around how we prioritize what kind of infrastructure we have in the city, and I'm particularly a big proponent of having less hostile architecture in the city. So this is something that falls in line with that, and I appreciate you guys doing, frankly, the heavy lift and all the work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rumbaugh, followed by Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor, and I just want to thank both Councilmember Scott and Councilmember Walker and Councilmember Diaz for co-signing. Okay, I want to thank you both for bringing this forward because I feel like it is kind of an outdated way to do things, and I actually appreciate the thoughts that we come up with something else, because down on my street on Marine View Drive, they had all these barriers, and we put up no parking signs, and there has not been any issue since they took out these barriers. So I feel like maybe this worked at some point along the way to do this, but I just feel like there's another way to handle finding people housing, finding them a place to be, reaching them with services. I think our HEAL team is doing a good job reaching people. I just had one question, and I brought it up to Councilmember Walker, and I apologize, Councilmember Scott, for not reaching out to you. But I was wondering if we could maybe think about doing boulders near parks and schools first. So removing those first. And I'm curious if that could be something that was added to this, that we make a priority, even as we're doing the evaluation, that we might remove those first. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Walker, would you like to respond?
So I don't think prioritization is a bad thing, but what we've heard from staff is that every site is very different, and they want to have the ability to evaluate each one for its own situation. And so if we put that in, which I don't think it's a bad idea to prioritize that, it won't change the outcome of the evaluation. So we could highlight those for extra care or something, but I think it takes away from the original intent, which was to evaluate each site as its own thing, which is what we've heard from staff, is that everyone is really different.
Okay. Thank you. Deputy Mayor, followed by Councilmember Hines.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, each of you, for bringing this forward for discussion. I do agree that there's certainly some opportunity for us to see what's the end game for these, and it does create kind of an environment where, boulders don't look great. The reality is there, but it's also a challenge for the different property owners on their ability to manage folks that are coming and going on their area or in the public spaces near them. I guess one of my questions is in regards to inclusive architecture. I'm not sure exactly what that means. What is I see there's some information here around trees and other things, which I think is great, also beautification and things of that nature. But I guess maybe separately, I'd just be curious of what inclusive architecture looks like, just so I can have a better understanding of what we're thinking about here. But ultimately, I do think that it's important for us to. This was a solution to concerns around certain areas, but maybe it's not the solution. And then what's the long-term plan for making sure these spaces remain accessible to the public, and beautiful for our city. So I think that having a full understanding of this is really important. Having a good conversation about this is important as well. So thank you guys or each of you, council members, for bringing this forward. Looking forward to continue to discuss it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hines, followed by Councilmember Scott. Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as far as, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as like inclusive infrastructure, like things that kind of can help activate the space. So maybe it's a bench, maybe it's a sculpture, maybe, but just something that invites people in rather than tries to keep people out. So we didn't want to be super prescriptive on like, it has to be a bench or it has to be this, but really trying to think about like, how can we activate this in a space in a way that serves dual purposes of like, it does deter people from doing the things that we don't want them to do, but it invites people to do the things that we do want to see more of in our community in these spaces.
Yeah, I actually, there's a great example of this with the McKinley Overlook. It's a great example of how it was a once kind of blighted, really struggling area, and it was completely reimagined.
Yeah, for stealing my thunder.
Well, but I'll give you some thunder back. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Councilmember Hines, thanks for your patience. Followed by Councilmember Siddall.
I'll make this relatively quick. Thank you to my colleagues for kind of bringing this forward. I think one question in item number 2, it says decisions to remove boulders should also include adjacent property owners in the agreement. When we say should, does that mean they will be part of the process, or does that mean we're just going to ask, we're going to try to reach out to them and then remove them anyways? Because I do agree with Councilmember Bushnell and some other folks that the rocks are ugly, but I have heard from multiple constituents who that appreciate the rocks being there because it's meant that they've had fewer instances of dealing with people kind of living right in front of their property. And so I would just want to make sure when we do this, we're going to be asking the private property owners if they want them removed in the first place, correct?
Yeah, so that's exactly why we're evaluating each one independently, because sometimes we do need to continue to use the boulders and they make a lot of sense for that site. So I'm not seeing, can you direct me to where it says should? Because we can clarify that language, but you're exactly right that we're not blanketly taking them out because of that reason.
Yeah, I know, and I think just in my mind, right, it's I could drive by a piece of property and say, wow, like I don't live here, but like those rocks are really ugly, we should remove all of them. But then if you went and knocked on that person's door, they say, actually, no, I really want them to stay in front of my property. And so, I think just as long as we're staying grounded in like the actual residents and people living where these things are, and I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, and I think that that's a big piece of it, like, and some of it is part of that, like looking at whether it's still there is, can something else that is a bit more inclusive do the same thing? In some places, it might not be worth it to put that thing there, or in some places, that might not be the case. Like, again, we mentioned, certain things that have to do with safety or critical infrastructure. And so like, it's not necessarily going to make sense for us to put a pocket park by a railroad, or, a bench next to a big power structure or something that they're trying to keep you more feet away from. But yeah, just making sure that we're doing that due diligence of really being intentional about, why was this put here in the first place? Does it need to be this? And if not, what could it be?
Okay. Thank you. That's great. I think the other part that I would just be curious about, or I have 2 questions, so I'll go to the next one. I do agree, like least restrictive environments is probably the most important way to approach this, but one of the challenges is if you have clearly communicating to the property owners, so like we're planting trees. What if a tree gets taken out or trampled upon, or we put some of this the more welcoming architecture, these plantings, grass, shrubs, if they get removed, are we going to, something I'd be interested in seeing as part of the city manager's assessment is what is the ongoing cost of those inventions versus other choices, right? And then part of that's also communicating with to the property owner, where if we're saying instead of the boulders, which I imagine have 0 or no cost beyond the installation, we could remove those and put trees. Are we then communicating to the property owners that then if the trees get removed or the bushes get cut or someone lays on top of this, we're going to come back and pay again to fix it? Or is this now on you, property owner, to take care of this in the future? And have you all, and that would be something if the city manager's going to say, like,
Yeah.
here are your different investments you could make, what are not only the one-time costs, but the ongoing costs associated with them?
Yes, we've spent a lot of time talking about this. We don't have the answer, which
Okay.
is why we're asking for this. Because there is an assumption that it will be more expensive because of the ongoing costs, but we don't know that
Yeah.
yet. And what could we do, how big do the trees need to be to make sure that they're not trampled on, or, those kind of questions. So we want to be really specific about that, so that when somebody asks that or makes that assumption, we can say, yes, it's going to be X amount more, but it will have these benefits. So we really want to get that in writing, so that's what this is asking for.
Okay. No, I think those are my two main questions. I think my other question, I don't know if you all can answer this, but it might be just something more broadly. But if we think about replacing something that's hostile like rocks with something that's more welcoming in a place where potentially were previous encampments, that will also welcome everyone back to that space too. And so I guess, did you all talk a little bit about what the enforcement of that might look like? So, if we remove boulders and we put benches, and then people come back and are sleeping on the benches and are there constantly, or they're back, and then the property owner's like, hey, look, we had this here before, now it's gone, now it's welcoming, but now I have people here that, are staying a lot longer than I had anticipated. Did you all talk a little bit about maybe what the enforcement component of that looks like, or how we would address that? Or that may be out of the scope, and that just may be something I'm thinking about, but just a question I had.
We have not yet, but a very important point for future investments.
I guess I'll say to that, I think it is something to think about with this, but I think that's kind of a broad, that's a general question for our camping ban policy and enforcement anyway. Because I think that's been kind of the crux of it in a lot of ways of well, we have it here, and there are penalties or consequences for being in places that there's a ban, but we're kind of telling the police, don't necessarily go in and arrest people. So I think that piece around enforcement is probably a different conversation that will impact this, but I don't know that it's specifically this policy that dictates that enforcement.
No, and I think thank you, Councilor Scott and Councilor Walker. I think that's probably more of I guess this opens into that, with this goes forward, opens us into that next conversation, which is we have used, similar to how we use infrastructure to encourage or discourage certain behaviors, we could always not use infrastructure and just use enforcement to encourage or disencourage certain behaviors. So if we through this study, we look at moving away from infrastructure as a way to discourage behaviors and move towards a more kind of open model, then I guess that does kick us into that conversation of then are we all right? And then how do we keep those spaces that are for the public open and to the public? So I just thank you for indulging me there, Mr. Mayor, and my colleagues for my questions.
All right, thank you. Final comment from Councilmember Hidalgo.
Yeah, thank you. And as Deputy Mayor mentioned, I live right next to the McKinley Overlook, and I remember a time when everyone wanted all sorts of barriers over there just to keep people out. And ultimately, what we got to today is a lot better because we've reactivated a space. So I agree with the values of where we're going with this, for sure. I do have some questions. So it does sound like this would not apply to private property owners that chose to do this themselves on their property, correct? We can't really mandate that.
No, if you have rocks on your property and not in the right of way, we can't do anything about that.
The reason I want to point this out is I don't, and there's also WashDOT has their own on their property. And I want to be really clear that, you may still see them somewhere, right? And that doesn't mean we can get rid of these types of things everywhere, correct? Councilmember Walker, you had an answer to that?
This is.
Was I wrong about WashDOT?
No, you're 100% right, but we want this to also be an invitation to different things you could do on your private property.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
100% agreed. I just don't want the expectation to be that if we did something like this, and let's say we do go through a budget ask and do this, that everyone's like, hey, I thought you were going to get rid of boulders. And we.
I see your point.
Yeah.
Fair point.
I do have a budget consideration that I think we should think about, right? So there's two other things. One, would we be, running some of these, because I assume this is like a report of the 24 sites and what it would cost and what they are. Is that kind of one of the to-dos here? Okay. I'd be suggesting that we also run it by neighbors in that area and make sure the people that live around there are kind of comfortable with it, maybe the neighborhood councils. When it comes to the budget, I don't know the numbers, and this is my concern. Let's say it costs X dollars, $50,000, $500,000, I don't know, per site. The question becomes, because of our budget today, and this is something new we're doing, it's going to take away from something else we could do. And where I'm stuck right now is trying to understand, is there a better way to accomplish this where we don't take away from good that we could do? $100,000 for a nurse at a shelter has a lot of benefit. So potentially my edit would be to try to think about alternative sources of revenue that we could use, grants or other ones, if they exist, to help us get there. If there's ways of matching funds or something from private donors or something, as a way to have that a lesser impact on all the other stuff we may want to do in the budget, because there just isn't, you get $27 million hole, right? And so that's where I am right now. Again, I haven't seen the numbers. I don't know what it'll do. I don't know what the total magnitude is of that. So, that's kind of where I am right now.
So two things. One, we don't know either, and that's part of what this resolution is figuring out what our options are and where we can pay for them. And two, what I'm trying to take away from is budget we're spending on boulders and putting it into.
Yeah, that's what I want to see. I want to see all of it.
That's
right?
what we're hoping. I don't
Yeah.
know that it's going to be a one-to-one, but that's why we're asking for the numbers.
Okay, so that's just really important to me because of the fact that I just, in this budget, there are a lot of other good things we can also do that gets, and that's the hard part of this job, because I want this to happen. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. There's a lot of conversation, and we have a closed session, but we'll take one more comment. We can keep our time in, please.
Thank you. I guess I hear the budget concerns, and I think that it's a good opportunity to really think about what we do versus like what we can activate community to do as well. And I don't know anything about the adopt a there's adopt a highway, adopt a spot. But maybe that's something that's more cost effective that we could encourage. So if this does pass, that would be something that maybe we could include for city manager to look into.
Okay. Thank you for your feedback, and thank you to all of you for your leadership in bringing this forward. Look forward to the future discussion. Okay, with that, we're moving on to committee reports. Are there any committee reports to share from the council? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to item number 7. I'd like to call on Deputy City Manager Allison Griffith to begin the City Manager's Weekly Report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for your awareness on this evening's agenda. There are 2 ceremonials. The first is proclaiming today, Tuesday, March 31st, as Transgender Day of Visibility. The second is recognizing the Daffodil Royal Court. There's one modification on this evening's agenda, which is to amend item 10, resolution 41878, to correct the tax parcel number. There's one opportunity for public comment under regular public comment regarding motions, resolutions, and ordinances on tonight's agenda. Please let us know if there's any questions related to this evening's agenda so we can have staff prepared. And finally, for your review, attached to the study session agenda is the weekly report to council. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to entertain a motion to convene to a closed session pursuant to RCW 42.30.140, Sections 4A and B, to discuss labor strategy not to exceed 30 minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor to convene to a closed session, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Motion is declared adopted. Closed session will begin once study session is adjourned. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. We are adjourned.